Chapter 941. He howled, ah, kill, 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 kill this group of this group of fallen heretics. Damn it, cough. The strong light was dazzling, and the smoke was choking their noses. In an instant, Harvey, who was covered in tears and snot, jumped in a panic, screaming and roaring. Harvey was not surprised by the sudden appearance of Owens and the others. After all, they had tried to rescue him several times along the way, and they were familiar with each other. But he did not expect that the other party would be so insidious this time. First, they used the false miracle as a shield, and then these alchemy tools that were not fatal but annoying enough to attack. In an instant, the situation was thrown into chaos. However, they were prepared. Just as Owens and the others rushed to the judgment platform, four figures quickly stood at the four corners of the platform. First, they held up their shields at the same time, and then waved their magic wands. Light flowed, and in an instant, a thick light wall was set up around the platform, blocking the attacker's attempt to rescue him. Immediately, the surrounding knights rushed forward to surround him. But at this moment, break! Amidst the entanglement, a figure suddenly leaped into the air with a roar. Together with his spear, he instantly passed over the head of the knight. He stretched out his hand, and the spear that contained the explosive divine battle aura collided directly with the thick light wall. Boom! The airwaves rolled, and the wind was overflowing. Under the violent impact, the bright light was extremely dazzling in the thick ink-like black fog. The bluestone floor around the platform jumped out of thin air and exploded at the same time. Dust filled the air, and the wind and clouds changed. Immediately, the light wall on the north side of the platform broke. Puff! The mage standing at the north corner suddenly spat out a large mouthful of blood. His body was like a leaf in the wind, and in an instant, he fell into the black fog and disappeared without a trace. After all, it was a magic light wall that was set up in a hurry. Naturally, it could not withstand such a violent blow. However, these mages did not intend to stop the attacker. They just wanted to stop him. Then Owens. Similarly, a spear of light shot out from the side and immediately stopped the attacker, who broke the light wall and jumped onto the platform. He shouted in a low voice, "Do you really want to betray the temple?" With a bang, the two spears collided in the air and flew back. The attacker, who landed back on the ground, shook a little, then took a few steps back to stabilize himself. Who else could it be but the other holy head knight of the temple? Owens? To be able to exchange a spear with him in a draw, his opponent must also be a holy head commander. Owens carelessly wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth, waved his long spear, smiled, and said, "Why don't you say that the divine palace betrayed us?" Ridiculous. Within the black fog, the blurry figure a few steps away reprimanded without even thinking. "It seems that you have truly fallen completely. That's why I said we didn't have any chemistry." Owens was not surprised by the other party's reaction. He took a step forward and casually brandished his spear. "Since that's the case, let's use it to talk." As soon as he finished speaking, he no longer spoke and brandished his spear to attack. Owens looked so casual and calm on the surface, as if he didn't care about the other party at all. But in fact, at this time, he was very anxious and did not dare to waste any time. Along the way, except for destroying the long-distance teleportation circle, they were lucky enough to escape from the temple's pursuit. There was no other way. The two sides were too familiar with each other. There was almost no room for tricks. In a head-on battle, the manpower that had been specially transferred from the temple's headquarters was not something that Owens and the others could resist. A few days ago, when he first arrived in the south, he saw that the temple's team suddenly divided into two groups. One group was escorting Sylvia to the trial, and the other group was escorting the other Puritans to the headquarters. When Owen saw this, he sensed that the opportunity had come. After all, Sylvia was only one person. The strength of the guards was naturally not as strong as the other team. This was the best time to rescue her. But from the current situation, Owens could not help but secretly complain in his heart. The other party really thought highly of Sylvia. It was true that the guards were divided, but most of them, including the temple's mages and the holy head knight in front of him, chose to follow this team. Owens did not know that there was something fishy about this. In order to let Sylvia come to the trial, Winston used many family connections and even implicated the royal court. The temple had to give this face. How could Harvey dare to let the escort team have the slightest accident? Trouble. In the entanglement, Owens took the opportunity to roughly observe the situation in the field. The black fog was still entangled and had not dispersed. It was not very clear, but the people on his side were indeed entangled. Although the impact of the surprise attack was still there, it was unlikely to save Sylvia in one fell swoop. But even so, no one proposed a retreat. They really had no other choice now, unless they gave up on Sylvia and watched her burn to death. Otherwise, before the trial, they would absolutely not retreat. What to do? What to do? Burning with anxiety, Owens, who was distracted by other things, immediately suffered retribution. For a moment, the opponent's spear closed in on him, and the layers of spear shadows were instantly nullified. They were both holy head knight, and the opponent's strength was not low. Seeing a flaw in Owens's delicate and fast spear shadows, it was naturally impossible for him to not grasp it. The light burst out decisively, and in an instant, Owens was shaken off the platform. If it were not for the fact that the black fog was really annoying and it was not suitable to pursue the victory, Owens was afraid that he would be completely passive. But because of this, Owens looked at the surrounding black fog, and his heart suddenly moved. A figure appeared in his mind. It must be known that he was just using this as a pretext to make a fuss. This false miracle, flash crystal, smoke bottle, and other wretched means were not used by him. It was complicated to say, but in fact, from the beginning of Owens and the other surprise attack to the failure of the first attack on the platform, it was only a short moment. At this time, the thousands of people in the square reacted. In an instant, the people near the platform saw the raging light and the overflowing wind in front of them, and they immediately retreated in fear. However, even if they wanted to retreat, some people behind them were unwilling to move. As the saying goes, a trial with a show of robbing the execution ground is a complete trial. It was not easy to wait for this good show to turn around, so naturally, they did not want to leave so early. Of course, more importantly, their position was at the back, so they were not very worried about their safety. The front wanted to retreat, and the back wanted to stay. The scene immediately fell into chaos again. At this time, "Idiot, what are you waiting for? Start the execution." Looking at the stalemate situation in the square, Harvey, who had barely recovered his vision, could not help but feel relieved. Then, the anger in his chest continued to rise. He turned his head and roared at the knight who was holding a torch not far away, who seemed to be stunned. "Sir." The head knight who was fighting with Owens frowned and could not help but remind him, "Sir." As soon as the words came out of his mouth, Harvey also knew that he was stupid. This kind of order should have been given secretly. Wasn't it forcing Owens and the others to fight with their lives on the line? Yes. The knight who was looking around didn't think much of it. He was startled at first, then quickly nodded and rushed down the platform with the torch. "Stop him! Stop them!" The orders with similar content sounded almost at the same time. The first one came from Owens and the others. Dry wood and branches were combustible. Once ignited, this wooden platform and Sylvia would instantly become a sea of fire, and there was no saving them. As for the second one, it was of course from Harvey. The situation had developed to this point, and he did not expect to be able to persuade Sylvia or continue to watch her make a fool of herself. He just wanted to burn her as soon as possible to end the chaos here. After all, the ordinary people did not know about the internal turmoil in the temple, and the temple could not expose its own scandal. Therefore, the ordinary people only knew that Sylvia's fall, but they did not know that it involved Owens and several other Puritans, and the result was also obvious. Harvey's order was much more effective than Owens and the others. Although Owens and the others were already attacking crazily, the number of casualties increased sharply in an instant. But after all, the difference in manpower was obvious. Coupled with the fact that there was a master on Harvey's side, they could not break through the defense at all. They could only watch the bright torches in the black fog as they approached the bottom of the platform. Stop. Ugh. With a muffled groan, Owens paid the price of a bloody hole in his left shoulder to temporarily turn the passive situation around. He roared at the knight in the distance. That's Sylvia. That's the F asterisk King Xiaowei, and that you worship, admire, and even secretly admire. You want to burn her to death? Are you sure you want to burn her to death? Although his words were intermittent, Owens's meaning was undoubtedly extremely obvious. He was using Sylvia's excellent character and popularity in the temple to play the closeness card. For this reason, he even used the name of adoration. Of course, this couldn't be considered as speaking without thinking. Xiao Weian did indeed have many supporters in the shrine, and this was obvious from the fact that Archbishop Simon Child didn't hesitate to clear her name of treason. However, the blurry figure of the knight in the black fog turned around and looked over. He waved the torch as if he was enraged. He said firmly, I'm sure. I want to burn her to death with my own hands. Who asked her to reject me before? Cough, cough about that, sir. I'm just following orders. Halfway through his words, the knight seemed to feel that it was inappropriate and quickly changed his words. But this was enough to make everyone present collapse. What was going on? Love and hate? If you can't get her, you're going to destroy her. Owens was also dumbfounded when he heard this. When he reacted, he wanted to slap himself. Damn it, his mouth was too cheap. Not to mention the crowd. Even Sylvia, who was in a daze on the platform, could not help but look at the knight. It was not that she was suspicious. She had indeed rejected the pursuit of many admirers in the temple. She was just thinking about whether she had said any harsh words when she had rejected them. Otherwise, why would the knight hate her so much? Harvey was amused when he heard this. Ha! Well said. I promise that as long as you follow orders, no one will blame you. Yes, sir. Having received support, the knight no longer hesitated and bent over to ignite the dry wood and branches. How dare you? In an instant, more than 10 furious roars were heard one after another. But the knight seemed to have made up his mind. He lowered his head and focused on igniting the fire, completely ignoring them. What are you doing? Harvey looked at the knight's actions in bewilderment. The knight did not throw out the torch to ignite it all at once. Instead, he held the torch and walked around the platform hurriedly while igniting the dry wood and branches in the peripheral area. He was very careful in his actions and basically left as soon as the fire was ignited. Sir, it's too easy to burn her to death at once. It's too easy. I was thinking that if I ignited all the firewood in the periphery, it would not delay things and we could watch it slowly burn to the inside. The effect should be better. How much hatred was there? Harvey and the 3 mages standing around the platform couldn't help but look at each other when they heard this. Their expressions were very strange. But then they thought of the sincere words that the knight had unintentionally revealed just now and suddenly understood. He was taking the opportunity to retaliate. Nonsense. Harvey pretended to be angry and reprimanded. Then he looked at Sylvia on the platform with a faint smile. Ha! It seems that Sir's popularity is not very good. Sylvia did not care about this ridicule. Instead, she looked seriously at the knight who was igniting the fire around her. She watched until the knight finished igniting all the firewood and threw away the torch. Then she pursed her lips and bowed solemnly. I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm sorry. Although I don't remember you. And I also forgot the words of rejection I said at that time. But I think that those words must have been very hurtful. I sincerely apologize here and hope that you can forgive me. He scratched his head. Also, Sylvia straightened her body and took a small breath. If possible, I would like to know what I said at that time. Actually, it's nothing. Well, you looked down on me at that time. Under the illumination of the fire, the young knight bent his arm and looked agitated. You said that you only like people who are stronger than you. You also ridiculed me for not having enough strength and wanted to arm wrestle with me to reject me. Damn, I'm so angry when I talk about this. He waved his fist angrily and roared with righteous indignation. We haven't even competed yet. How do you know that my strength is not as good as yours? Besides, even if my strength is not as good as yours, do you know how hurtful your words are? Men, You can say anything, but you can't say no. Chapter 942. As a man, you can say anything, but you can't say no. The young knight clenched his fist and punched out. His powerful posture and words, coupled with his agitated accusation, immediately made the judgment stand fall into a dead silence. Sylvia blinked and blinked again, looking a little confused. Harvey and the others were dumbfounded. They looked at the unusually agitated young knight with an extremely strange expression. No way. Just because of this reason, he hates me until now. If Harvey and the others didn't know whether to laugh or cry at these words, then the young knight's next move made them completely dumbfounded. Across the gradually rising wall of fire, the young knight calmed down a little, lowered his head, and spread his hands sadly. Of course, I know this reason is extremely ridiculous in your eyes. After all, I have the right to like you, and of course, you have the right to reject me. I shouldn't hate you so much, but you don't have to hate me. We can't be together in life, but we must sleep together in death. Sorry, this is the only way I can think of that you can't reject me. After he finished speaking, the young knight first bowed and apologized under Xia Weion's strange gaze. Then, he suddenly rushed forward, instantly passing through the wall of fire and stepping onto the platform. Then, the fire rose high, completely blocking the view of the outside world. Harvey and the other three mages subconsciously opened their mouths and stretched out their hands. Witnessing this amazing turn of events with their own eyes, even Harvey and the other three mages were stunned. They turned their heads and looked at each other, not knowing what expression to put on for a moment. Oh, it's burning, it's really burning. Sigh, a beautiful woman with a unique temperament. Did I see it wrong? Why did someone rush in just now? Although the open space in the square was heavily affected by the black fog, because of the wall of fire, it was now very eye-catching. Philip, who was condescending, leaned half of his body out of the window. Suddenly, he saw something and turned his head blankly. Could it be the legendary suicide for love? It had to be said that mental patients had a broad mind. Philip, who had always been a weirdo, had quite accurate intuition. Without being at the scene, he actually guessed the thoughts of Harvey and the others at the moment. And at this moment, Winston, who had his arms crossed in boredom because Twain did not appear and was watching coldly from the sidelines, suddenly had a serious expression. He quickly stepped to the side of the window, his eyes narrowed, and stared fixedly at the dazzling fire in the black fog. In the next moment, whoosh! Blazing flames suddenly shot up into the sky and spun into a gust of wind, instantly cleansing the dense black mist in the surroundings. Subsequently, the might of the flames expanded, revolved, continued expanding, and revolved swiftly. In merely a short period of a few breaths of time, when looked at from afar, a flaming tempest had suddenly taken form madly, and it stirred up the surroundings and raged without restraint. Philip opened his mouth and was stunned. On the other hand, Alan seemed to have thought of something. His lowered hands unconsciously clenched into fists, and a hint of excitement flashed in his eyes. This was a storm. Sir is here. In just a moment of thought, a strange muffled bang sounded. The flaming tempest that was constantly expanding and rotating right under their eyes seemed to have reached a critical point and decisively exploded. It was like fireworks and also like the falling of the Milky Way. With a loud bang, flaming meteors instantly broke through the sky and radiated in a dreamy and magnificent manner. They not only covered the surroundings of the square, but also completely filled the field of vision from above. Even though they were far away, Philip and the others could feel a warm wind blowing against their faces. They subconsciously licked their lips and murmured in a low voice as if they were dreaming. So King beautiful. Philip thought it was beautiful, but in the eyes of Harvey and the others, it was an out-and-out disaster, especially the three mages who were closest to the platform. No one knew what had happened. A moment ago, they were still lamenting the irrational behavior of the young knight, and the next moment, there was a blur in front of their eyes, and waves of scorching heat hit them head-on. Before they could react, they saw the monstrous flames that blotted out the sky and covered the sun, like an ancient giant beast with its bloody mouth wide open. In just a moment, they were completely swallowed up. Ah, Harvey screamed. Harvey, who was far away, was lucky enough not to be engulfed by the fire at the first moment, but he couldn't hide from the dense fire meteors behind him. The huge gas that had just been compressed and exploded was sent into the air, but it was hit by the fire dragons one after another. As it twitched and screamed, it went up and down, left and right like a rootless duckweed or a willow catkin in the wind. It was completely out of its control when the unclothed Harvey finally fell to the ground. More than half of his old bones were scattered. What the hell happened? Harvey looked around in a daze. The trial platform had been completely destroyed, and Sylvia and the young knight had disappeared. He didn't know whether they were dead or not. The ground around him was covered with blackened branches and dry firewood. These were the flaming meteors that constantly swept across the sky, and also the culprit that caused him to be in such a sorry state in the air. When he turned his head again, a piece of charred wood with black smoke was lying not far in front of him, vaguely in the shape of a human. He sniffed with his nose and could even smell some burnt meat. Meat! Harvey was stunned, and his old eyes suddenly widened. He screamed and jumped up like a rabbit that had been shot by an arrow, rolling and crawling as he kept retreating. What kind of human-shaped charred was that? It was clearly a corpse that had been roasted from the inside out. Looking at the charred staff that was tightly gripped in the corpse's hand, it wasn't difficult to tell that it was one of the 3 temple mages, but he didn't know which one. At this moment, an anxious roar suddenly came from afar. "Sir, be careful!" Be careful? Be careful of what? Although he was quite frightened, Harvey, who was dizzy from the fall, was obviously not completely awake. He looked around blankly and found that he had been sent to the edge of the open space. The people who were originally here had retreated more than 10 feet. So now there were no enemies around, and no one was on his side. He was temporarily out of the battle circle. The one who warned him was the head commander in the distance. He looked very anxious and wanted to rush over many times, but he was helplessly entangled by Owens and couldn't get away. This familiar scene was exactly the same as when Owens wanted to get away to save Sylvia, but he was entangled by the head commander. However, Owens was obviously a little worse. Not only did he not let the head commander get away, but he also kept shouting as if he was deliberately suppressing the head commander's warning. "Huh? It's okay, it's okay. You heard wrong. We are not calling you sir. Sir, have you had lunch? If you haven't, are you hungry? Have you eaten? Then what did you eat? Bread or cheese? What about you? You speak too slowly. Isn't it good that I helped you ask? Sir, be careful above. Hide quickly." Just when Owens was pestering endlessly and Harvey was even more confused, a light knight not far away finally realized that something was wrong and shouted anxiously. Above? Harvey looked up subconsciously. The first thing he saw was the fake statue floating in the air, and then a huge hammer suddenly appeared in his line of sight. From the angle directly below, it looked like the god of light was holding a hammer and mercilessly smashing it at his head. In an instant, his pupils contracted sharply. At this time, Harvey realized where the danger came from. The statue of the judge, which was originally standing behind the judgment platform, had collapsed, perhaps because of the explosion of the storm just now, and the direction was coincidentally in his direction. Harvey was not a strong warrior. He was a mage, and his weak body would not reflexively dodge in the face of danger. And because he was focused on his official career, his magic cultivation was just passable. Now, looking at the huge hammer that was getting closer and closer, his thoughts were running fast, but his hands and feet were cold. Not to mention dodging. He couldn't even take a simple step. This is retribution. Is this the punishment given to me by Father? Looking at the hammer in the God of Light's hand, Harvey's mind flashed this last thought. Then, sir, boom, gravel splashed, dust filled the sky, and the ground of the square trembled at this moment, as if it was about to collapse. Then, screams of horror came from all directions, one after another. At this time, the thousands of people realized that it was not a good time to watch a show, but a deadly battle between masters. If they were not careful, they might be involved in it and become cannon fodder. Suddenly, the sea of people in the square seemed to have become a pot of boiling water, and the curtain of chaos opened. It's him, right? On the third floor of the shop, Philip looked from beginning to end, shook his head, and smacked his lips. TSK, I was a little puzzled before. These people who came to rescue were too bold, using their own father as a cover. So that's how it is. If it's that wretched guy, then everything is not strange. He did not say it clearly, but in fact, it was not much different from saying it clearly. It was easy to think of a person who had such shocking destructive power as soon as he appeared. It was a loud laugh. Finally willing to come out. Stepping on the window lattice and leaping into the air of the square, Winston was not in a hurry to find Tang Yin's trace. Instead, he suddenly looked up to the sky and roared, the sound echoing for several miles. The next moment, from all directions outside the square, there were several long roars at the same time, and the sound was like thunder. Obviously, this should be the master that Harvey prepared for Tang Yin. Chapter 943. First, it was the majestic statue, followed by alchemy props such as flashing crystals and smoke bottles to create chaos. Then, it was the scene of robbing the execution ground, followed by the explosion of the flame storm and the collapse of the statue. In a short period of time, a series of actions were performed one after another. The sound and light effects were excellent, dazzling thousands of people who were watching. If their lives were not in danger, this trip would definitely not be in vain. Unfortunately, when the gods fought, the mortals always suffered. By the time the people reacted, there were already people surging in front of them. They were screaming, and the scene was completely chaotic. In such a chaotic situation, it was naturally not suitable for them to watch the show. As they hurriedly squeezed and fled, they temporarily forgot when Sylvia, who was at the center of the incident, disappeared and whether she was buried in the sea of fire. At this time, on the west side of the square, on the extremely deserted street, because everyone ran to watch the show, a young temple knight carried a woman on his back and ran wildly. Huff! What'd I tell you before? I told you to keep a low profile. That group of scammers is unreliable, but you didn't believe me. Huff! What now? You've been betrayed, right? You deserve it. Huff! But how was my confession just now? Isn't it great? Are you touched? You're just using this to divert everyone's attention so that the fire in the periphery will burn. After that, you'll take the opportunity to use that firestorm-like martial skill to escape. After a calm analysis, his expression became slightly hesitant, and he asked another question. Am I right? Damn, you're destined to be alone for the rest of your life. This is not the point, okay? Ahem, the point is acting. Acting, understand? Those idiots must have thought that I committed suicide for love. Ha! Stop it. You're not the one running. Why are you panting? It's very itchy, you know. His breathing became heavier. Tang Yin. Yes. Has anyone ever told you that you're really shameless? No. He simply denied it. The young temple knight who was panting suddenly turned his head and grinned, revealing 2 rows of white teeth. Look, my teeth are dripping. Why are you panting again? He was speechless. By the way, Sylvia. He gritted his teeth. Yes. Has anyone ever told you that you should really lose weight? Don't pinch, don't pinch. You're allowed to complain, but I'm not allowed to retaliate. Besides, you're really heavy right now. I feel like I'm carrying a huge mountain. Damn. Still pinching? If you pinch me again, I'll throw you away. It feels pretty good. Everything is stable now. Needless to say, the 2 who ran away in a sorry state were naturally Tang Yin and Sylvia. In fact, according to Tang Yin's previous plan, they were supposed to rescue Alan and the others in the next 2 days. However, after knowing that Winston had brought together Alan and Josiah's family members with Sylvia, the choice that Tang Yin had previously faced naturally no longer existed. After hearing about Philip's existence, Tang Yin was even more assured about the former's safety, so he changed his plan. In any case, Saving one person was the same as saving two people. After knowing that Sylvia's trial was a good starting point, Tang decided to save her first. After all, Winston's target was him. So regardless of whether he stepped into this trap or not, the other party would come looking for trouble. So before that, he might as well do something that he liked to do. Huff, huff. Take a break first. After running out of the street, Tang turned into an alley and put Sylvia down. Then he leaned against the opposite wall, panting heavily like a dead dog, sweat dripping down like water. Sylvia did not make a sound, but she did not look friendly at all. Her expression was cold, and her eyes were as sharp as a knife. She looked straight at Tang as if she wanted to poke a few holes in his body. In fact, if it was convenient for her, Sylvia would not have just pinched Tang but would have directly fought him. This guy, he actually patted her there. However, after seeing Tang's sweaty face and heaving chest, Sylvia pursed her lips and took the initiative to lower her eyes. Tang's words just now were not entirely a joke. Sylvia was really heavy now. It was not her weight, but the restriction on her body was as heavy as a mountain. Think about it. Even with Sylvia's innate strength, she was almost unable to walk under the pressure of this unknown restriction. One could imagine the pressure on Tang who had carried her until now. Fortunately, Tang had strengthened his strength training during this period of time. Otherwise, it would be a real tragedy if he could save someone but could not move her away. Feeling that the aura on the other side had weakened slightly, Tang touched his nose and smiled awkwardly. Well, just now, there are 2 restrictions on my body. As if she did not want to talk about what had happened just now, Sylvia took the initiative to change the topic. One is inside my body, sealing my fighting energy. The other is outside my body, infinitely increasing my burden. After a pause, she looked at Tang and pursed her lips and said, "This second restriction is actually not very significant. I originally thought that someone wanted to deliberately embarrass me. Now that I think about it, this should be directed at you. You can't run far with me on your back." This was indeed Winston's plan. Tang's speed was too abnormal. If there was no restriction, forget about encircling and suppressing him. It would be a problem to even see Tang's back. What kind of look is that? It's as if you were implicated by me. Please, I just saved you from the sea of fire. Seeing that the other party no longer pursued the matter, Tang said smoothly. Sylvia ignored Tang's intention to deliberately misinterpret and asked directly, "You know this is a trap. Why did you still come to save me? Since we're acquaintances, since we met, I can't just leave you in the lurch." Tang spread his hands. "Oh, is that so?" With her back against the wall, Sylvia took a deep look at Tang and said non-committally, "What else? All right, my brain suddenly short-circuited, all right?" Meeting Sylvia's seemingly meaningful eyes, for some reason, Tang suddenly felt a little uncomfortable. He waved his hand and changed the topic. "By the way, can this restriction be lifted? If I carry you on my back again, before anyone catches up, I'll probably be half dead from exhaustion." "Yes, just find a high priest." Tang rolled his eyes speechlessly. "Isn't this nonsense? Do you still have a good relationship with people in the temple?" "Actually," Sylvia hesitated and said, "give me a little more time. After my realm improves, I may be able to lift it on my own." Tang was stunned when he heard this. And then he thought of a scene where Sylvia walked towards the judgment platform with an irresistible, majestic momentum. He raised his eyebrows in surprise. "What? Do you have an epiphany?" Sylvia nodded. Tang couldn't help but shake his head and laugh when he saw this. He sighed with emotion. This matter is really... When we left the square just now, the old man named Harvey seemed to have been smashed to death. Now it seems that it's fortunate that he died early. Otherwise, wouldn't he be angered to death by you? Sylvia's martial arts talent was extremely outstanding. What was even rarer was that she had experienced hundreds of battles and walked on the edge of life and death all year round. In this way, as long as she didn't die, it was only a matter of time before her realm improved. It was not surprising. What was a little unexpected was that the key step from the peak of Earth level to Void level was actually because of this trial. If Harvey didn't die, He might really vomit blood and die of suffocation. Well, it seems that I have to save you. After a little rest, Tang In got up and came to Sylvia. He turned his back. Come on up, Sir Knight who benefited from a disaster. As soon as the teasing words fell, suddenly, it's you? Ah, here. Someone come quickly. That bitch escaped. Tang In and Sylvia turned their heads in shock and saw at the end of the alley, a fat auntie with an empty basket on her arm was pointing in their direction. She looked excited and kept shouting. This place was not far from the square. After the chaos broke out, the people who stood on the periphery of the crowd, such as this auntie, would have been here if they had retreated in time. There are bad people in the crowd. Shaking his head, Tang In no longer hesitated. He carried Sylvia on his back and ran out of the alley. However, perhaps because the auntie's voice was too sharp, Tang In and Sylvia had just left the alley. Stop! At the end of the left side of the street, a middle-aged man with a heavy sword had just turned around and immediately saw Tang In and Sylvia. He immediately shouted in joy. Do you think I'm an idiot? Curling his lips in disdain, Tang indecisively ran to the right. Xiao Weian turned her head and looked at the middle-aged man who was shouting a warning as he chased after her. She frowned. It's only an Earth stage warrior. With your strength, it won't take you long. No need. These are just cannon fodder. Glancing around, Tang In casually explained, that guy Wincillin has put in a lot of effort this time. I don't know where he found them, but there are 4 genuine void stage powerhouses. Damn, didn't they say that void stage powerhouses are rare? Why are they like leaks now? Cut a bunch and a bunch comes out. Wincillin. What? You don't know him. The last disciple of the sword god. I broke one of his claws not long ago. After explaining the grudge between the two sides concisely, Tang In licked his lips. Unfortunately, it seems that he doesn't learn from his mistakes. Does he really think that I don't dare to kill him? I've never dealt with him, but I've heard of him. Pause for a while. Sylvia shook her head speechlessly and sighed. I only knew that your strength increased at an astonishing speed, but I didn't expect that your ability to cause trouble was also so good. First, he helped the Grey Coat army fight against the Bran Empire, then provoked the Temple of Light, and now he fought against the Sword God's disciple. Other than the barbarians of the Northern Wilderness, Sylvia really couldn't think of anyone else who could do such a crazy thing as Tang In to provoke the 3 giants in one breath and still be alive and kicking. It's really not my fault. I can only say that those who are not envied are mediocre. Tang In could roughly guess the reason why Wincillin would do this. It was nothing more than being too arrogant and living too comfortably. Now that he had suddenly suffered a blow, the difference was too great. His thoughts were suddenly confused, and he wanted to get back at him. However, from the corner of his eye, Tang In narrowed his long and narrow eyes, and the corners of his mouth curled up into a sneer. Since your wish is so strong, then I'll fulfill your wish and leave you with a memorable lesson. Don't thank me. Philip, on the other hand, did not mind at all. He, who had wandered around the brothels all year round, had long known how attractive shopping, especially clothing shops, was to women. However, the guard commander was at a loss. He was about to go over and dissuade them. Suddenly, whoosh, 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 whoosh. The sound of arrows piercing through the air could be heard, and the crossbows flew everywhere. As if struck by lightning, the front row of guards who had walked out of the door instantly leaned back and fell back into the shop. Blood spurted out from the various vital points that were pierced through, instantly dyeing a large area of the ground and the various exquisite clothes that were hung around the shop red. The shop fell silent. The shop attendants, who were guessing the situation of the trial in the square next door and complaining that their bosses were heartless, never thought that they would witness such a bloody scene in their own shop instead of seeing a cruel trial. Assassins! Be alert, keep an eye on them. Damn it! The guard commander reacted immediately and roared. He waved his hand and pointed at Philip and the other 2, indicating for his subordinates to keep an eye on them. However, as soon as he spoke, he was directly drowned out by the terrified screams of the surrounding shop attendants. He could not help but turn his head in anger. Shut up. Find a place to hide. Huh? Before he finished speaking, he saw a screaming figure running around like a headless fly crashing into him. The vigilance of the profession of a guard was self-evident, although he could tell that the other party was an ordinary shop attendant by his appearance. The guard commander still subconsciously reached out to push him away. However, as soon as his fingers touched the other party's clothes, his body suddenly stiffened. He looked down in shock. A pitch-black dagger easily pierced through the armor and deeply stabbed into his heart on the left side of his chest. With another twist, the accumulated strength in his body was immediately drained clean along with the wildly surging blood. Subconsciously raising his hand to grab the dagger, the guard commander's eyes widened like copper bells. He looked blankly at the cold silver mask in front of him. He opened his mouth to shout something, but his vision suddenly turned black and he fell on his back. Not only the guard commander, but the vigilant guard around him also suffered the same fate. Whether it was the few customers or the shop attendants, they were screaming nonstop in fear just a moment ago. The next moment, they suddenly turned into cold-blooded assassins, handing out death daggers and accurately stabbing into their vital points. This was not a battle, but a one-sided massacre. As for the side of the guards who were crushed, they were completely unaware of what had happened. They could only look blankly at their companions around them, falling one after another without any strength to fight back. They were instantly stunned. In fact, the guards who could follow Winston, the young master of a big family, were naturally not ordinary people. Although their strength might not be comparable to martial arts masters, in the professional field of bodyguards, what they could do, martial arts masters might not necessarily be able to do. But now, right under their noses, the service staff on this floor of the shop had been completely replaced, and they had not noticed at all. This was really inconceivable. It was also because of this that when these assassins attacked violently, the guards almost did not have any consciousness to resist and instantly lost their lives here. I knew it would be like this. What did I say before? You didn't listen to my reminder. Looking at the majority of the guards who had fallen in a short moment, Philip, who was standing at the back, did not seem surprised. He shook his head and held his forehead, looking bitter and hateful. Then, he turned around and patted the shoulder of the frightened young daughter of the rich merchant, comforting her. It's okay, dear. Don't you want to choose clothes? I think we have to speed up. There's not much time. There was indeed not much time. More than half of the guards were killed in one confrontation, and only a small number of guards were left. Naturally, they were no match for these assassins. In the end, the young waiter who had just killed the commander of the guards walked over. He first looked at Philip, then bowed to Alan and said lightly, "Sir Alan, please follow me. I will take you to a safe place." Alan was also not surprised by the bloody scene in front of him. He knew very well that as long as Tangen was here, he would definitely come to save him. There was no doubt about that. But the person in front of him, he looked up and down, and finally focused his gaze on the silver mask on the young waiter's face. He said in surprise, "You are me." He waved his hand and interrupted. "I was sent by the boss to pick you up." Of course, Alan and Michaud had seen each other before, but at that time, Michaud, who was Tangen's right-hand man, had not put on a mask. Now, Michaud was also an indispensable and important character by Tangen's side, but he did not want to be recognized or mentioned by anyone. Alan was slightly startled, and Philip interrupted, curling his lips in dissatisfaction. "That guy didn't say he would bring me along? Didn't he say he would give me an explanation?" Michaud glanced at him and said calmly, "The boss said he didn't need me to say anything, and you would naturally follow him." "Ha ha. At least he has the heart." "Wait, no. Is he calling me a follower?" Philip instantly reacted and cursed. "Damn it. I rushed here to clean up his mess, and he still mocked me. No, I have to poach him. I have to poach him. Does he really think that my reputation as the flower wolf of the imperial capital is fake? There will be a chance next time." Michaud's tone was still indifferent. "Josiah's family members have been safely transferred by us, just before you came here." F***CK. Philip was speechless, and the rich merchant's daughter raised her finger in horror. You, Imperial Flower Wolf, You are that Philip? Uh, Philip blinked and knew that he had spilled the beans. He helplessly spread out his hands and said, "If I say that I was just talking nonsense, dear, would you believe me?" Slap. Bastard. The rich merchant's daughter covered her face and ran out of the shop crying. Young people these days are really impulsive. It's just a nickname. Is there a need to? Rubbing the red handprint on his right cheek, Philip's expression was normal. Didn't you say we were going to a safe place? Let's go. After a pause, Michaud slightly pursed his lips and waved his hand sideways. Please. Michaud's subordinates would clean up the mess, and he believed that it wouldn't be long before the real waiters, who were tied up in the cubicles, came out and found that the shop was back to normal, as if nothing had happened. Walking out of the door, Philip and Alan paused and subconsciously raised their heads. Traces of coolness fell on their faces, making them feel quite refreshed. Is it raining? Ha! Someone is going to cry. Chapter 945. P.S. I saw it. Don't worry, the civet cat's condition is recovering. Today's word count is close to 4,000. It's quite enjoyable to write. I hope all of you will enjoy reading it as well. Caret. Rain could be seen as the tears of God. God was never a merciful fellow. If he shed tears, it would inevitably dye the entire world with the color of sorrow. However, from Philip's mouth, someone was about to cry. Of course, this person was not Tang Un. From a certain point of view, Tang In and Philip, this strange pair of bad friends, could indeed be said to be telepathic despite their different standpoints. Tang In understood Philip, so after knowing that the person who found out about Alan's identity was Philip, he simply gave up on the rescue plan and no longer worried about the safety of Alan and the others. At the same time, Philip also understood Tang In very well. Even though he knew that Wen Sin had brought a large number of masters with him this time, and that their backgrounds were not small, some of them even came from the Palace of Offerings. However, since he had seen Tang and appear to save Sylvia with his own eyes, Philip believed that he must be fully prepared. Therefore, the person who was about to cry could only be Wen Sin. However, the actual situation now was that although Tang In did not cry, he also wanted to cry, but had no tears. The sweat dripping from his body was much more than the tears. Sylvia was really too heavy. This weight even caused Tang Un to have no trace of fanciful thoughts about men in his heart. It was as if the person he was carrying was not a great beauty with a unique temperament and a delicate body. Instead, it was a huge mountain that made one feel despair just by looking at it, and he was the foolish old man who was moving the mountain. Huff. I can't, I have to lose weight, If you continue like this, when you get married, you can directly flatten your man on the wedding bed. Although he was panting and saying that he could not, Tang In's feet were running very fast. He did not even forget to ridicule her. Then put it down. Pursing her lips, Sylvia, who had just escaped with her life from the trial platform, seemed to be in a good mood. She did not feel that she was a burden at all. She hugged Tang Un's neck tightly. You brought that group of people behind you running until now. Where exactly do you want to go? Oh my, I'm warning you, don't provoke me. Do you really think I don't dare to abandon you? Huff, wait a little longer. The terrain here isn't complicated enough. I can't move freely. Huff. Needless to say, Sylvia, who had been through hundreds of battles, could certainly understand what Tang In meant. The current situation was that Tang In could only let go of Sylvia in order to fight back. However, the key was that the current terrain was not complicated enough. Tang In could not temporarily get rid of the pursuers behind him. Therefore, if he let go of Sylvia now, she might be instantly killed by the void-level powerhouse who was chasing after them. Then you still need to run a little faster with your current speed. Looking back, Sylvia said calmly, "In the sky directly behind us, in 3 minutes, a void realm cultivator can catch up with us. On the street on the right. In about 5 minutes, the cannon fodder you mentioned earlier should be able to circle around to our route." Huff, that's easy for you to say. Why don't you try to speed up? While talking, Tang In's eyes had already scanned the surrounding terrain. Then his feet suddenly stopped, changed his route, and rushed to a 3-story attic on the right. He did not enter, but stopped at the west wall of the attic, temporarily disappearing from the sight of the void-level cultivator who was chasing after him. Take a break. Putting down Sylvia, Tang In said concisely, then shook his hand, narrowed his eyes, looked up, and took a deep breath, as if to regulate his breathing. In a short moment, Sylvia watched Tang In's undulating chest slowly calm down, and couldn't help but nod lightly, showing a few traces of admiration. Of course, this was not a break, or was not just a break. It was a quick adjustment to the best state before the battle. That's right, Tang In was about to make a move. Plans could never keep up with changes. Because of the previous righteous Annie, Tang In's whereabouts were exposed a little too early, and soon they were targeted by the nearby Earth-level cultivators, as well as the Void-level cultivators who rushed over. With Tang In's current speed, it was impossible to get rid of them. Only by quickly killing these two people could they have a chance to run to the complicated terrain. And this was what made Sylvia puzzled. Needless to say, Earth-level cultivators were not an issue. Sylvia believed that if Tang In really wanted to kill them, it was not impossible to kill them in one move. But the Void-level cultivators were different. Even if Tang In had a variety of strange assassination methods, even if Tang In's strength was higher than the opponent's, in the Boundless Sky battle, the opponent could advance and retreat freely. No matter how one looked at it, the outcome would not be decided in a short time. And as far as Sylvia knew, although Tang In had the strength of a Void-level cultivator, he never liked to fly in the air. The only time he fought in the air was when she waved her spear to help him. The pursuers came quickly. Just as Sylvia was thinking, the Void-level cultivator finally met Tang In for the first time. A short old man in a navy blue robe, with a goatee, looked very ordinary. It should be similar to Xiao Weian's idea. This Void-level old man appeared very openly, and did not seem to be in a hurry to call Wen Silin and the others over. He just floated in the air above the left side of the attic, and looked directly at Twain, who was still dressed as a light knight, with a slightly scrutinizing gaze, seemingly curious, but also somewhat disdainful. And Chiluo, narrowing her eyes, Sylvia looked at the Void-level old man, who completely ignored her existence, and frowned as she called out the other party's name. There were not many Void-level cultivators. With Sylvia's previous status, it was not surprising that she knew the other party. Huh, an acquaintance? Slowly exhaling the last turbid breath, Tang In looked up and down and asked casually. Shaking her head, Sylvia looked a little disgusted. No, I just heard of him. He has been famous for a long time, and he is good at using a pair of unique iron claws. He likes to cut the enemy into pieces and is extremely cruel. If I remember correctly, his current identity should be the Bran Imperial Court Consecrator. Haha, identity doesn't matter. As long as he has no friendship with you, then this matter is easy to deal with. Listening to Xiao Weian's slightly worried introduction, Tang In smiled and did not say much. He raised his hand and pointed at Enchirao without hesitation. Then, he withdrew his hand and slowly slid it across his neck. He grinned, revealing his teeth. Throat cutting. There was no expert in a fight. Since they were enemies, there was nothing much to say. Seeing this, Enchilua's old face instantly turned pale. His robe was fluttering, and a pair of bloody iron claws had appeared on his hands. He waved them and roared, "Boy, you are courting death." At this moment, Enchilua quickly made a decision in his heart. He must personally use his iron claws to cut off every piece of flesh of this ignorant boy. However, as soon as the word death fell, before Enchilua could put his cruel thoughts into action, his vision suddenly blurred, and a demonic blade was directly in front of his throat. Not to mention how scared Enchilua was at this moment, Sylvia below was completely stunned. She was sitting next to Tang In. Just a moment ago, she saw him turn his hand and show the dagger, but the next moment he suddenly disappeared and appeared in front of Enchilua. It was as if the distance between them did not exist at all. Teleportation? Space magic? Sylvia shook her head subconsciously. Although Tang In's martial arts were a bit strange, in any case, It was within the scope of a warrior. It was absolutely impossible for him to be a space magician. But if that was the case, how did he cross the distance of hundreds of feet in an instant? Roar! Sylvia suppressed the doubts in her heart and was awakened by Enchiloa's furious roar. She squinted her eyes and looked up at the sky. Her mouth was half open, and she was stunned again. Attack, defense, attack, attack, attack. In just a short moment, the claw shadows were swallowed by the blade lights that were hundreds of times larger than the claw shadows. Even Enchiloa's embarrassed body was faintly discernible, and he looked like a small boat on a turbulent sea that was about to fall. Close combat. And it was close combat. Sylvia had fought with Tang in many times, so she was very clear about Tang's combat style. It was not an exaggeration to say that Sylvia thought that if she was brought into the rhythm of close combat by Tang on the ground, even if the opponent's combat strength was one level higher than his, it was basically useless. But that was only on the ground. Sylvia did not expect that Tang-un's abnormal close combat level was still as sharp as before. This was different from the fierce battle in the air in the academy. At that time, although Tang-in also fought in the air, it was obvious that Tang-in was not used to it. It was like pulling chestnuts out of the fire, and he almost died trying to find a point to borrow strength from the enemy. This time it was different. Tang did not deliberately find a point to borrow strength from Enchiloa's body, nor did he stand upright in the air. Instead, he used a method similar to teleportation and constantly flashed around Enchiloa's body crazily to suppress him. Like a close combat on the ground? These words sounded a bit tongue-twisting, but they were exactly what Xiao Weian was feeling right now. She looked at Twain in a daze, as if she was looking at a space magician who seemed to be a monster. He was skillfully using a dagger to engage in hand-to-hand combat with someone, and even had the upper hand in the end. This scene is too F***ing weird. Well, no matter what Sylvia was thinking, she was sure of one thing. This time, the famous and ruthless Enchiloa was done for. That was almost the truth. As a space-level powerhouse, Enchiloa only said one sentence after entering the arena. After that, he didn't have a chance to speak anymore. He was suppressed endlessly, completely suppressed endlessly. Actually, judging from the iron claws on his hands, this Enchiloa should also be an expert in close combat. Perhaps this was also the reason why he had looked at Twain with a somewhat judgmental and disdainful gaze. However, the person he met this time was a real expert. After holding on for about a minute, finally, he was able to get a hold of him. Ah! A shrill scream sounded. Among the sparks, two shadows were suddenly thrown out of the arena, drawing two lines of blood in the air. Those were two iron claws that were cut off from the wrist and connected to the palm. Then, the shrill scream suddenly stopped, like a rooster whose neck was suddenly pinched. In the air, thousands of blade lights disappeared at the same time. Only Tang was left, holding the dagger with a backhand, twisting his waist and stepping forward, drawing a long and faint blurred line of blood in the air. In front of him, Enchiloa's short body leaned back, and his white head was raised high as if he was trying to avoid something. However, the exposed part of his neck had already been marked with a horrifying bloody wound that was so deep that broken bones could be seen. Cutting the throat was also a kind of etiquette. As long as it was a kind of etiquette, it was impossible to take it back. At this moment, the outcome was clear. Life and death were decided. Below, Sylvia looked at this visually shocking scene in a daze. She felt that time seemed to have stopped, and she opened her mouth in a daze, unable to speak. Immediately, the line of blood faded, and the corpse fell. Phew! This pervert! She muttered in a low voice and exhaled the turbid air that had been suppressed in her chest for a long time. Sylvia shook her head and retracted her gaze. She pursed her lips and suddenly felt a little disappointed. At this moment, she even suddenly understood Wencelin's mentality. That fellow who had once been chased by him to the northern wasteland in a sorry state and couldn't escape after traveling for thousands of miles seemed to have become even stronger and had left him far behind. No wonder the sword god's disciple, who was like a son of heaven, couldn't help but feel jealous. While she was lost in her thoughts, Sylvia suddenly frowned and turned her head to look to the right. A few feet away, a middle-aged man holding a heavy sword had just turned the corner of the attic. He was panting, and his chest was heaving up and down. It seemed that he had run a long way. It was the Earth Stage warrior who had first discovered Tang En's trace. However, his attention was not on Sylvia, who was very close to him. Instead, he opened his mouth and raised his head, looking at the sky foolishly. As the saying goes, it's better to come early than to come at the right time. The middle-aged man appeared at the right time, just in time for Tang En to kill Enchantment. Of course, if he was given another chance, it was hard to say whether he would still desperately chase after him like this. The next moment, the middle-aged man blinked and blinked again. His already open mouth was even wider, and his face was full of shock and astonishment. It turned out that Tang En, who was still in the air just now, had disappeared in an instant like a light breeze and smoke, disappearing without a trace. Thinking of something, the middle-aged man subconsciously looked around his body. He held his heavy sword tightly, and his expression was a mess of nervousness. However, at this moment, "Are you looking for me?" A palm stretched out from behind and quietly rested on the man's shoulder. The middle-aged man's body suddenly stiffened when he heard the faint voice. "Oh, although I've always thought that cannon fodder should have the consciousness of cannon fodder, your consciousness is too high. Then goodbye." Chapter 946. The gloomy clouds were still gloomy, and the gloomy color did not increase or decrease. There was only a slight drizzle, which brought a slight coolness to the oppressive atmosphere here. A moment later, on the west wall of the pavilion, the strong Do-Chi fluctuation not long ago was like a firefly in the dark night, quickly attracting a few sensitive experts. Broken throat, plus a sharp blade through the back. TSK. Beautiful, a fatal blow, no room for struggle. Looking at the neat ground around him, the gray-clothed old man put down the corpse in his hand, shook his head, and smacked his lips, giving an accurate judgment with some admiration. I said his close combat ability is very strong. When Sillin frowned at the corpse on the ground and said with a gloomy face, the reason he was in a bad mood was of course not because the Earth-grade warrior was killed, but because the latter obviously did not take his previous instructions to heart and dared to approach Tang, and so unscrupulously, leading to the failure of the tracking. It's just an Earth-grade warrior, not to mention a sneak attack. The slightly chubby old man with white hair and a rosy face seemed to have a different opinion. He glanced at the corpse indifferently and snorted lightly. Earth-grade strength is not weak. Even if it was a sneak attack, to be killed without resistance, the opponent is indeed not simple. And, shaking his head, the gray-clothed old man looked around. Since it was a fatal blow, then the Do-Chi fluctuation we felt before should not be him. Why hasn't Eldarin arrived yet? The so-called Elder and was naturally in Chiloa, when Sillin and the other two were startled when they heard this. Yes, they could feel the Do-Chi fluctuation, so in Chiloa, who was also a void-grade warrior, naturally could feel it. But he had not appeared yet, no need to wait. At this moment, a cold voice suddenly came. In the north of the pavilion, a tall old man with a stiff expression like a tombstone walked over. With a wave of his hand, two bloody iron claws and a corpse in a navy blue robe were thrown over. Cut off the hand and slit the throat, clean and neat. He can't be more dead. Eldarin. Looking at the corpse of Enchantment on the ground with both hands cut off at the wrist and body twisted like a big mouse, when Sillin and the other two could not help but change their expressions and cry out in alarm. How is this possible? From the time we sensed the fluctuation of Do-Chi to the time we rushed here, it was at most 5 minutes. The chubby old man's face was full of shock. He no longer had the relaxed and casual look from before. He subconsciously shook his head and denied. If I hadn't found this pair of iron claws in the vicinity, I wouldn't have believed it either. But now this is the truth. The tall old man squatted and narrowed his eyes. There was a maniacal smile on his cold face as he played with Enchilawa's head that was about to fall off. This is a real butcher. Look, the fatal wound was a cut on the neck. From right to left, half of Mr. N's laryngeal bones were broken instantly. The strength was impeccable. Beautiful. In this way, he could guarantee an instant kill, but at the same time, his head wouldn't be chopped off on the spot, nor would it fall from a high altitude and lose its beauty. TSK. Perfect. He smacked his lips and felt satisfied as if he had just eaten a sumptuous feast. Then, he put on a serious face and said, "Look here. He must have fallen from a high altitude, so Elder Ann's face was preserved very well. This should be considered a blessing in disguise. At least he didn't need to be sewn up when he was buried." He waved his hand and said, "Of course, this isn't the main point. The main point is that Elder Ann's expression was preserved perfectly before he died." Pain and shock. Thinking, the tall old man raised his blood-stained finger and touched his chin, trying to reconstruct the scene. This scene made the corners of Wincillin and the other's mouths twitch. However, Wincillin didn't seem to feel anything and continued to analyze. It's not difficult to understand the pain. Let me guess, this should be caused by Eldarin's hands being chopped off before his throat was cut. As for shock, Eldarin was a person who had seen many big scenes. Whether it was knowledge, experience, combat experience, etc., he was extremely rich. What exactly did he see to make him so shocked? I'm really curious. After thinking for a while, the tall old man shook his head regretfully. Unfortunately, the battle was too short. There wasn't even any fresh blood on Elder Ann's iron claws. He couldn't hurt his opponent at all and was simply killed. In this way, there are fewer clues for analysis. From the current situation, we can only know that Eldarin was thrown down from a high altitude after his throat was cut. In other words, Eldarin fought with the opponent in the air, and it should be a head-on battle. Pause for a while. He took a slight breath, looked up at the stunned Wincillin, and asked coldly, "I think you need to give us an explanation. In addition to being good at close combat, does that Tangan really only have the strength of early-stage void level?" As soon as the words fell, the expressions of the other two old men changed again, and they looked at Wincillin in surprise. They couldn't be blamed for this reaction. And Chilua's body was in front of them, and anyone could see how he died. And in just a few minutes, a void-level martial artist was simply killed, and it was in the air where he could freely advance and retreat. This sounded too shocking, because this meant that the opponent's strength was likely to have an absolute, overwhelming advantage. Otherwise, even if a void-level martial artist couldn't win, he shouldn't have no chance to escape. Wincillin was also confused at this moment, and he couldn't believe what he saw in front of him. However, it wasn't easy for him to persuade a few void-level martial artists to come together. Of course, he wouldn't say that the information here might be wrong. Gritting his teeth, he braced himself and said, "There must be something wrong here. That Tangan's strength is indeed only early-stage void level. And Master also tested it not long ago. It can't be wrong." The three old men certainly knew who Wincillin's master was. Hearing him mention that person, they naturally had no doubts about this judgment. But at the same time, the tall old man frowned. Sword God also made a move, but he couldn't kill the other party. The matter of Wu Ding and Tangan's fight involved too many people. If they were not careful, the news that Sword God had gone to the north could be revealed, so Wincillin didn't dare to say it before. But now that the three void-level martial artists who didn't know about it reacted, their hearts suddenly sank. Think about it. Even Sword God couldn't take him down. What kind of terrifying strength did the other party have? Wincillin quickly explained, Master only used one sword at that time, and he didn't use his full strength. Moreover, let's not talk about the level of strength. In a while, you will know how treacherous and cunning that assassin guy is. Yes, it must be like this. Oldham must have fallen into his trap. That's why he was quickly killed. At this point, Wincillin, of course, had to infinitely belittle the situation at that time. And by the way, infinitely raise the image of Tang In as a sinister and cunning person who liked to use petty tricks to defeat his opponents. Of course, the latter was no pressure at all. The three old men looked at each other when they heard this. Although they were somewhat dissatisfied with Wincillin for not saying anything, since they were already here, regardless of Wencelin's family background, they couldn't just turn around and leave. In the end, they all nodded slightly. Seeing this, Wencelin's heart was relieved. While ordering his subordinates to collect Enchilua's body, he said seriously, Old N's death was an accident and a regrettable warning. Once again, I repeat to everyone that Tang In is really sinister and dangerous. Everyone must be careful not to let him get close, otherwise the consequences will be unpredictable. In fact, Wencilin had already said this many times when he came here. But masters were all proud, including Wencilin. If he hadn't suffered a big loss at the hands of Tang In, how could he be so afraid? So at that time, although the four Void Masters looked at Wencilin's background, they were very polite and took note of it. But in fact, they didn't think so. The so-called close combat, in their eyes, was just a petty way of fighting that those low-level cultivators who hadn't broken through to the Earth stage and couldn't control the vast Qi between heaven and earth would specialize in. But now looking at Enchilua, whose strength was similar to theirs, and the bloody wound on his neck that was so deep that the bone could be seen, the three Void Masters didn't dare to be careless. They all nodded solemnly. You stay here and collect Olden's body. When this matter is over, immediately transport it back and give it a grand burial. Everyone, let's continue the chase. After giving orders to his subordinates, Wencilin immediately turned to look at the three Void Masters. The restriction on Sylvia's body hasn't been lifted, so Tang In can't have run far. He should be in front. Let's speed up now and take revenge for Olden. P.S. Sorry, it's been delayed until now. Civet has something important to do today. Actually, I mentioned it once before. Sister Civet is not in good health. She has cancer and had an operation, but she couldn't cure it, and it shouldn't be cured. She has to go to Beijing Hospital for a checkup every few months, so today I sent her to the train station. I only rushed this chapter after I came back. Sorry again. Chapter 9:47. Tang In indeed did not run far. After Wencilin and the others continued to fly forward for a few minutes, their figures paused one after another as they sensed something. Their gazes were all cast towards the slightly messy place below. This was a slum-like existence, and it was also the landmark area of almost every Brand City's southern district. Since it was a slum, it was inevitable that it would be chaotic and desolate. In fact, this was exactly the case. Looking down, it was full of ordinary tiled houses of varying heights and grayness. A few simple clothes were hung up in a few courtyards to dry, which meant that there were still people living inside. However, most of the courtyards were overgrown with weeds. It was obvious that they had been abandoned or had become the temporary residence of homeless people. Interspersed among the countless houses were potholed streets, messy alleys, and so on. All kinds of shabby debris were scattered all over the place, faintly emitting a faint odor, causing people to shrink back. In short, this was a chaotic place with a complicated terrain and a harsh environment. Anyone with a bit of wealth would not be willing to set foot in this place. But now, when Wencilin and the others, whose identities could definitely be considered noble, had come, and they were looking at it very seriously. It was as if they wanted to see a beautiful flower in this harsh soil. After a moment, the gray-robed old man was the first to withdraw his gaze. He shook his head and laughed. Hee, it seems that our prey is very confident. He wants to be a hunter again. Generally speaking, anyone who could be called an expert would have extremely sensitive senses. This was not a mysterious statement to scare people, but a perception of the external environment after many years of actual combat and cultivation. The specific manifestation was that when one was being spied on maliciously, even if one was in a bustling crowd, one's state of mind would secretly fluctuate and lock onto the other party's location. Of course, if both sides were experts and the spying party was good at concealing themselves, then this perception would be reduced to the minimum and almost undetectable. There was no doubt that Tang In's attainments in concealing his aura and disguising himself did not need to be said. Wencilin and the others knew very well that they could not compare to him. But now, they still felt that they were being spied on, which could only mean that Tang In was doing this on purpose. In other words, Tang In would no longer run and hide like before. Instead, he decided to counterattack on the spot. This was the battlefield. The surroundings had been completely sealed off. He should know that it's impossible for him to escape silently. Haha, looks like I've really made a good move. Winston laughed. He was a little surprised, but also a little proud. The so-called good chess piece was naturally the restriction on Xiao Wei-in's body. With Tang In's speed, if he were to break out of the encirclement alone, when Silin and the others really had no confidence in stopping him. But if Tang In insisted on saving Sylvia, he wouldn't be able to escape from this area with her dragging him down. Now it seemed that Tang In really valued Sylvia very much, to the point that he didn't even hesitate to risk his life for her. Of course, there was another possibility, which was that Tang In had the confidence to fight 1 against 4 and planned to kill them before leaving. However, when Silin and the others didn't even think about it. What kind of joke was this? The 4 of them weren't random people. They were real Void Masters. The terrain here, frowning slightly, the tall old man looked at the messy environment below and shook his head. It's troublesome. It's just a sneak attack. The slightly chubby old man curled his lips. Although they had learned from Enchilua's mistake, they were already wary of Tang Un and didn't dare to be careless. But they still subconsciously despised his fighting style. As long as we're careful and don't leave each other's sight, what could he do to us? Then let's do it. The area here isn't big. Even if we search inch by inch, it won't take long. In order to avoid trouble, Silin immediately made the decision. He then cupped his hands and bowed to the tall old man. Old Fei, please be the bait. The so-called bait naturally meant to go down to the ground to search and lure Tang Un to appear. After all, although the view from above was vast, there were always some details that couldn't be observed from above. There was no doubt that with Tang Un's abnormal close combat ability, doing this was naturally extremely dangerous. However, the tall old man called Old Fei didn't refuse. He nodded expressionlessly and slowly landed on the street below. Immediately after, when Silin and the other 2 spread out in the air. With the tall old man as the center, they stood in the air with a distance of more than 10 feet. At first glance, the 4 people who maintained a distance between them looked like a small battle formation, and it was the kind that was 3-dimensional on land and air. It was amazing. In fact, the truth was more or less like this. A battle formation formed by 4 Void Stage martial artists was not unprecedented, but its power was definitely not inferior to a normal battle formation in the sense of the word. It might even be better. And this battle formation, as if they were facing a great enemy, was indeed enough to give Tang In face. They weren't worried that Tang In wouldn't make a move because he couldn't escape at all. And this place was only so big, they could always find him. So from this point of view, if he didn't want to be forced into a desperate situation and only counterattacked, Tang In would definitely choose to make a move. Therefore, Silin and the others were very patient. In the past, they could fly back and forth several miles in an instant, but now they were moving at a speed similar to that of a tortoise, a snail, and other heavy animals. They followed the tall old man below, carefully exploring step by step. This place was really messy and very deserted. There was basically no one on the street that wasn't very wide. Perhaps it was because they hadn't returned from the square yet, but the clothes that fluttered back and forth in the drizzle in the courtyards were also ignored. The only source of sound was the sound of the debris on the street being swept up by the cold wind, tumbling along the way. This was the slum, silent, so silent that there wasn't the slightest bit of life. After a while, they walked through a complete street. Suddenly, with a soft pah, the outer window of the 2-story building on the right side of the street was tightly shut, and before the window was closed, the tall old man had already moved his gaze over and saw a sallow and emaciated face filled with fear. That unconcealable fear, even after the window was closed, could still be clearly felt through the trembling eyes behind the broken glass. There was no doubt that this was a local resident, which was a poor person. And when a poor person looked through the window of his house and suddenly saw someone walking in the air outside, other than closing the window in fear, what else could he do? It It was just a small episode, when Scylla and the others didn't care, and the tall old man didn't care either. He naturally retracted his gaze. The next moment, his pupils shrank sharply. Hiss like the sound of the wind. The imperceptible blade light was like drifting raindrops directly in front of his eyes. The space between his eyebrows trembled. No one knew where this blade light appeared from, and it was delivered in front of him. Even the heart of the experienced void realm didn't have the slightest ripple. If he didn't turn his head and see it with his own eyes, this blade light would feel no different from the thousands of raindrops around him. But this wasn't real rain after all, or even if it was still a fatal rain. No one dared to let it drip between the eyebrows. However, the tall old man didn't dodge or let it go. He watched expressionlessly as the blade light pierced between his eyebrows. Then, an inch away from his skin, the cold blade light suddenly stopped, making a crisp sound like metal colliding. At the same time, a layer of colorless transparent barrier lit up around the tall old man's body. It was slightly rippling, with sharp edges and corners, like an armor. In fact, this was an armor, a dochi armor. But what was different from ordinary martial artists was that the tall old man's dochi armor was stronger and more concealed. He believed that if it wasn't triggered by this blade light, no one would be able to see that he was covered with a dochi armor. This was why when Scylla asked him to be bait, and why the tall old man didn't refuse. He was indeed the most suitable candidate to be bait in this group of people, and the facts proved that this was the case. Looking up and looking at the figure dressed as a light knight in front of him, the tall old man frowned regretfully. To be honest, you have disappointed me a little. Ha! You finally appeared. Twain, you finally revealed yourself. He roared with laughter towards the sky, and it was filled with the wild joy and complacency of his scheme succeeding. At this moment, when Scylla's heart was filled with an irrepressible sense of accomplishment. So what if you are fast? So what if you are talented, insidious, and cunning? You are insidious and cunning, but didn't you still fall into my trap? Compared to one Scylla's excitement, the other two void-level old men in the air were also happy. But after all, they had never suffered a loss in the hands of Tang Yin, so they didn't have much emotion. Seeing this, they quickly surrounded, but did not rush to attack. Instead, they controlled the surrounding area at the first moment, cutting off the escape route of Tang, who was said to be extremely fast. This was a real desperate situation. The few people present firmly believed that Tang Yin, who had fallen into the trap, could not escape, and could only accept the fate of being strangled. Chapter 948. The characteristics of close combat were very clear, speed, and intensity. And because of the narrow space, every move was usually a killing move that could decide life and death in minutes. It was extremely exciting, and it was not an exaggeration to say that it was a game for the brave. At the same time, because of these characteristics, once the close combat circle was formed, outsiders would be afraid of accidentally injuring and would find it extremely difficult to intervene. Therefore, when Scylla and the others were worthy of being called void-level masters who had experienced hundreds of battles, they did not rush to encircle him, but instead chose to seal off the surroundings. Of course, they did this because they believed in their companion, the expressionless Old Fae. As a matter of fact, Old Fae didn't let them down and had even exceeded their expectations. To be honest, I'm a bit disappointed. Raising his hand, an icy blue light suddenly bloomed, instantly covering the entire street and sweeping the whole place. It was as if a strong storm had swept over, and the debris on the ground all around were whirled and scattered in all directions. The scene was spectacular for a moment. He did not passively defend and wait for his companions to help, nor did he fear close combat by flying into the air to dodge. This old Fae seemed to be extremely confident, choosing to counterattack at the first moment. The strong demeanor of a void-level master was clearly visible. If one attack did not succeed, he would instantly escape. This was the normal way of an assassin. However, Tang Yin, who was shrouded in the blue light, did not do so. Instead, he raised his dagger, his figure flashing around the tall, old man like a ghost. Thousands of light blades madly attacked like rain, as if he wanted to use this to forcefully kill the target. However, ding ding ding, Old Fei's expression became even more disappointed. He allowed the dense light blades to hit his body, shining like countless sparks, but he did not move. Shaking his head, "Your movement is not bad, your speed is not bad, but your strength is too weak. What's more serious is that you do not know how to judge the situation, impulsive and stupid. It's really a collapse mess." Without answering, Tang In continued to attack, as if he was looking forward to which blade could penetrate the old man's defense. "Your mother, why don't you make a move?" Although it was very satisfying to hear, when Sillin was more concerned about such a good opportunity to kill Tang in one fell swoop. He could not help but anxiously curse in his heart. It was as if he had heard when Seelan's thoughts, or as if Elder Fei was angered by this person who was weaker than he had imagined. The difference was too great, and he felt a sense of humiliation as if he had been toyed with. After criticizing him word by word, he no longer hesitated. He held his arms in front of his chest, allowing the blade light to penetrate the vital point of Zhongmen Dekong's heart, and suddenly pushed it out. Swoosh! His robes fluttered as icy blue pillar-shaped fighting lights burst out from between his palms. They were like surging waves as they slammed down madly. Each wave was higher than the last, and they instantly drowned Tang Un's figure, who couldn't dodge in time. Although there was some disdain in his words, someone like Old Fei would naturally not be careless in a battle and would go all out. This ice blue dough light that was like a turbulent sea wave was the purest form of dough chi, without the slightest bit of finesse. Its purpose was to use force to suppress others. This was what it meant to defeat Tin intellect with brute force. In the face of true power, schemes, tricks, speed, and so on were all meaningless. Reality proved that Old Fei's cautiousness was not excessive. Just as the pillar light was about to pass through the entire street, Tang Un's figure suddenly struggled out from it and staggered as if he was about to fall. Immediately after, boom, the abandoned building behind him became a substitute victim and was instantly hit by the icy blue dough light from the front. Gravel and wood immediately flew in all directions, exploding and shattering. Let's end this battle without any suspense. Shaking his head in disappointment, Old Fei's figure suddenly charged forward, ignoring the dagger that pierced towards him. His right palm, that contained a berserk dough light, slammed down like thunder, instantly destroying Tang Un's weak defense and hitting the top of his head. Boom! The dough light violently exploded, and a strong wind blew in all directions. The gravel and wood that had just flown out were immediately swept back, and the area was instantly cleared. Other than Old Fei, who had not yet retracted his palm, there were no other figures within a few feet of him. It was as if Tang Un had been smashed into nothingness by the power of this palm. Silence. Dead. Dead. Just like that. He died. The battle between the two sides actually did not last for long. Just as when Sillin and the others stood in their positions and raised their heads, the battle was over. This situation was undoubtedly out of everyone's expectations. The two void-level old men looked at each other with slight surprise, and then turned to look at Sillin with a strange expression. This is the close combat strength that you have emphasized 100 times. The fierce person that can withstand the sword god's sword? Are you joking? Or is the sword god joking? Of course, Sillin was not joking. In fact, the shock and astonishment on his face was clearly much stronger than the two void-level old men. He looked down in a daze, and his expression was filled with confusion. Yes, it was not ecstasy, but confusion. Dead? He actually died just like that. It shouldn't be. Subconsciously grabbing his hair, Sillin was at a loss. He had suffered a great loss at the hands of Tang In. Even if he did not accept it verbally, but in his heart, he actually acknowledged the other's strength. When he came, he had thought of all kinds of unexpected situations and had made all the preparations he could think of, including a bitter battle, a tragic victory, and even mental preparation for failure. The only thing he had never thought of was the possibility of an easy victory. In his opinion, this was something that was completely impossible, and it was meaningless to think about it. But now, this situation had happened, and it was right under his nose. It was as if he had lost something when Scylla and the others, who were in a state of shock and had not recovered from their shock, did not see that Elder Faye was also shocked below. However, what was different from their shock was that Elder Faye was not surprised by Tangen's death, but was at a loss for the palm strike just now. Just now, it seemed that he did not hit the real thing. It was light, as if he was hitting a shadow. His expression suddenly changed. That's not right. Before he finished speaking, suddenly, a mournful scream resounded through the sky. The scream came from the left side of the sky, and the one guarding there was a slightly fat old man. In fact, he did not realize what had happened at all. It was just that in the previous moment, he suddenly felt that the surrounding temperature had plummeted and the chill was bone-chilling, as if he had fallen into an ice cellar. Killing intent. Before his mind could react, his battle-hardened nerves were a step ahead of him, and his body tilted to the side. Immediately, the slightly fat old man felt a sudden chill on his right shoulder, and blood spurted out. He looked on helplessly as his entire arm was cut off at the shoulder and scattered into the sky. He opened his mouth and screamed and retreated. Damn it! Elder Faye was the first to react. He suddenly turned his head and saw that the figure that he had hit on the head had appeared beside the slightly fat old man at some point in time, and coldly waved a dagger to cut off his arm. Don't retreat. Looking at the slightly fat old man who had subconsciously retreated, Elder Faye, who had already soared into the sky, suddenly became anxious. Although he did not know what he had just fought with, and what strange situation had happened. That Tangen did not die was a fact, and this also meant that the other party was not simple. Thinking back to Scylla's previous warning, the other party's speed was extremely fast. Now that the slightly fat old man had subconsciously chosen to retreat, not only would he not be able to avoid the other party's pursuit, but he would also increase the distance between them, and it would be difficult to rescue him. Fight. Sure enough, the anxious Elder Faye's expression suddenly froze. He saw that Tangen suddenly flash in the air, and instantly appeared beside the slightly fat old man who had retreated dozens of feet away. He waved his dagger, and countless blade lights scattered, and in an instant, streams of blood were drawn. Immediately after, he flashed again, and, like a shadow, he instantly appeared beside the slightly fat old man and continued to wave his dagger. It was not that the slightly fat old man did not counterattack, but his counterattack was too slow. Before he could even throw out a punch, his body had already been hit by more than 10 blades. Before he could explode with Do Chi, the blade lights had already reached his vitals. He could only dodge and retreat, and continuously dodge and retreat in a sorry state. Teleport? When Scylla and the others finally saw what close combat in the sky was, and also finally understood how Enchilloa had died before. Under this kind of teleportation that was completely undefendable, it was almost impossible to not be closed in. And once they were closed in, they would be completely suppressed, and there would be almost no way to fight back. How could they fight like this? Don't retreat. Here, come here. Damn it. When Scylla and the others roared angrily, they had never felt that their speed was actually so slow. They could not catch up with the slightly fat old man who was retreating, and they could not catch up with Tangen, who seemed to be teleporting. They could only follow behind bitterly, and watch as their companions were completely suppressed, but they were unable to lend a helping hand. And that slightly fat old man seemed to have been completely beaten into a daze, and he could not hear any warning at all. He screamed again and again, like a wild rabbit being chased by a cheetah. The only thought in his mind was to escape, to keep escaping, to get as far away from this demon who was like a maggot in his bones, as far as possible. But this was destined to be a delusion. Sir System was very considerate, and promptly sent the Permetha teleportation skill. The current Tang In had completely changed from a bird gun to a cannon. It was no longer like before, where even if he met a cat or a dog who was not as strong as him, as long as he could fly, he could only watch and passively take a beating. Although he still could not fly, he did not have to hold any resentment towards this. Under the Permethought teleportation skill, as long as it was within range, he could arrive in an instant and launch an attack. Moreover, to create such a battle environment, Tang In also paid a price. The shadow clone was blasted into pieces by the tall old man. Although it would not hurt Tang In's muscles and bones, it was inevitable that he would be injured. This was the skill's limitation and could not be changed. Fortunately, the effect was good, and he succeeded in making Wincillin and the others, who had never seen such a strange skill, fall into an instant of shock. And since he had paid a heavy price, how could Tang In let this fat piece of meat, which was also the slightly fat old man, escape? For an expert, an instant was enough to determine the outcome of a battle. While you are sick, I will take your life and pursue you fiercely. The slightly fat old man's mind was already in chaos, and he had completely lost the thought of resisting. Other than subconsciously blocking his vital parts, defense had also become an extravagant hope. He was like a weak woman who had been stripped naked, and other than screaming, there was nothing else. This feeling of being at a loss was very unfamiliar to the slightly fat old man. To be exact, ever since he reached the void level, he had never been in such a sorry state. Every time he made a move, he did not treat the opponent like an ant in the palm of his hand and control their life and death. But now he felt that he had become that insignificant ant. Then he became even more terrified. Chapter 949. It had to be said that although the malice attached to the fatty in this world was as vast as the mountains and seas, there were two sides to the story. If one looked at it from a different perspective, this was actually an advantage. For example, the fate of this slightly fat old man. If it was a slightly thinner person, under Tang In's relentless pursuit, not to mention whether or not he would be able to hold on for such a long time, just the blood that spurted out would be enough to take away half of his life. However, the slightly fat old man was still alive. Although he was still in a sorry state, his screams were full of energy. It was obvious that he would not die in a short period of time. Of course, this slight advantage was not enough to reverse the situation, nor could it save him from a tragic fate. At this point, the slightly fat old man was very clear in his heart. Tang In was also very clear, and when Wincillin and the others saw it even more clearly, he decisively roared, "Attack, attack!" There was no hope in chasing, and there was no result in reminding. Finally, when Wincillin, who had exhausted his patience, could no longer endure this passive situation. With a wave of his long spear, the green and purple Dookie suddenly erupted. Old Fei and the other two were stunned when they heard this, and then their expressions changed slightly. Just as they had said before, it was not easy to interfere in close combat, not to mention that they were not close at all. If they attacked in this situation, it would undoubtedly cover the slightly fat old man as well. Wincillin's attack was very decisive, and the current weather was also very beneficial for him to display his Do Chi. As soon as the roar fell, the green and purple spear light was like lightning in the clouds, instantly streaking across the evening sky and falling rain, directly attacking Tang In's back. Of course, the situation of the battle was constantly changing, and with Tang In's ghostly movements, this spear seemed to be aimed at Tang In's back, but in reality, it was not much different from attacking both of them at the same time. The slightly fat old man, who was dizzy and only relied on his instincts to escape, did not notice this malicious attack. Tang In saw it. Although he felt that the character of this sword god's last disciple was not good, and that he was vicious and merciless, he could still be considered a kindred spirit. However, for this great opportunity that was hard to create, Tang In naturally could not afford to lose it. As he drew his blade, he suddenly kicked the slightly fat old man's lower abdomen, sending him flying a few meters away. He retched and howled miserably. Ouch, cough, cough. After being stunned for a moment, Tangen's face suddenly lit up. It turned out that this kick had not only allowed the two of them to dodge the lightning-like spear light at the same time, but it had also created a fatal opportunity. His lower abdomen felt as if it had been hit head-on by a speeding carriage. Naturally, the pain was unbearable. The slightly plump old man could not help but bend his waist and stretch his neck, making an appearance as if he was singing to the sky. This posture coincidentally caused the chubby old man to reveal his vital spot at that moment. That was his fat neck. This was a great opportunity, just like in the movie East Becomes West in the modern world, where Hong Chi-gong couldn't bear to use the divine dragon tail to kick Ouyang Feng. There was no other reason other than the fact that his posture was so handsome that it would be embarrassing if she didn't kick him. Tang En laughed loudly while holding such a joyful mood. Then, in an instant, he charged forward. Their shadows intersected and brushed past each other. An almost undetectable silver-white blade light flashed through the fine rain. In the next moment, the figure of the slightly plump old man suddenly stiffened, and the miserable howl came to an abrupt end. "Be careful! Stop!" The alarm came too late. If Tang En could see this opportunity, old Fei and the others behind him could naturally see it too. It was just that they were too far away. They could only watch as Tang En quickly waved his dagger, drawing an elegant arc in the drizzle, and instantly piercing the chubby old man's fat neck. It's over. Not to mention that the slightly plump old man did not have a steel defense like old Fei. Even old Fei, looking at that soul-stirring, dreamy arc, couldn't help but feel nervous. So, there was no need to mention the slightly plump old man who was dizzy and had almost no consciousness to resist. Another void-level powerhouse, another slash to the throat. Was there a need for this battle to continue? While they were in a daze, old Fei and old Fei's eyes suddenly lit up. "Die!" Thunder thundered. Several streaks of purple lightning, accompanied by a tyrannical roar, instantly struck down from the gray clouds, accurately enveloping Tang En and the slightly plump old man's surroundings. The power was terrifying. Immediately, bang! Wherever the lightning touched, a large piece of flesh suddenly exploded and splashed out. A bloody mist rose, blowing along with the cool wind, and there was a faint smell of roasted meat. Of course, it was the kind that was roasted. Needless to say, this was naturally when Silen's move again. In the eyes of Tang En and old Fei, that opportunity just now was a chance to endanger the life of the slightly plump old man. But in Silen's eyes, it was also a good opportunity to kill Tang En. Since he couldn't save him anyway, he might as well take advantage of the time when Tang En killed the slightly plump old man and decisively use his killing move. If he could use this opportunity to kill or seriously injure Tang En, then the slightly plump old man would not have died in vain. It had to be said that Silen's brain was still very flexible. In an instant, he had sorted out the various relationships and found the method that was most in line with his own interests. Perhaps this was the so-called elite education that large families cultivated from a young age. However, the lightning flashed, and when the needle-like drizzle quickly fell to the ground with a large piece of bloody mist. When Silen narrowed his eyes and looked carefully, the area in the sky was already empty, and there was no trace of a person. Naturally, when Silen would not make the same mistake a second time, he immediately put away his spear and stood in the air, looking around vigilantly. At this time, old Fei and the other person also reacted. First, they looked at the pieces of charred meat that fell on the roof below the area, and the corners of their eyes twitched a few times. Then they looked at Silen with a complicated expression, shook their heads slightly, and finally looked down as well. Although they were all void-level powerhouses and also came together, the relationship between old Fei and the others was not necessarily that close. It was only because everyone's status was equal and their strength was similar, so it was inevitable that they would have some friendship. As for risking their lives for revenge, that was out of the question. But the fox grieves for the rabbit's death, this did not mean that they did not have any objections to Winsillin's actions. After all, taking advantage of the danger of his companions to launch an attack without caring about anything, and in the end, causing his companions to not even have a complete corpse left, this method was really chilling. However, when they looked at each other, Old Faye and the other person couldn't help but smile bitterly. As matters stood, as long as Winsillin didn't want to leave, then even if they wanted to retreat, there was nothing they could do. After all, Winsillin had come with them. If something happened to Winsillin in the end, then even if they managed to escape, how would they explain it to the Winsillin family and the Sword God? Shaking their heads again, Old Faye and the other person couldn't help but sigh in their hearts. This time, it seems like we shouldn't have come. Now that they had come, they could only pray that the lightning would hit Tang in as they wished, so that the slightly fat old man's death would be worth it. However, in the next moment, boom, dozens of meters away, beside the street below, a figure suddenly appeared out of thin air and fell down, smashing into the wall of the alley, causing dust to fly everywhere. Winston and the others abruptly turned their heads to look. Cough, cough. After a series of coughs, a slightly disheveled figure quickly leapt out from the dust. Dressed in the Knight of Light's armor, who else could it be but Twain? It was just that Tang Un's external appearance was somewhat miserable. His face was black and gray, his hair was in a mess, and the tattered light armor hung on his body. It was easy to see the large and small blood stains all over his body. Of course, most of them were not his own. It could be seen that the killing just now, especially when Sillin's final lightning sneak attack, had caused Tang In to pay a heavy price. But so what? The head in his right hand, the head of a void-level powerhouse, had already explained everything. To be able to exchange a light injury for the life of a void-level powerhouse, no matter how one looked at it, this deal was definitely profitable. Cough, you seem to be very shocked? Why? Looking up, seemingly innocently looking at Winsillin and the others, Tang In raised the head in his hand and said casually, "It's just a sneak attack. What do you think? What do you think?" Of course, the head would not answer, and Winsillin and the others' faces suddenly darkened when they heard this, and there was a faint hint of anger. "It's just a sneak attack." Wasn't this disdainful sentence what the chubby old man had said before, and what they tacitly agreed with? Now, the other party had indeed launched a sneak attack, but it had achieved excellent results. It had to be said that this was really a wonderful irony, and also a resounding slap in the face, making Winsillin and the others feel ashamed and speechless. Casually throwing away the head and patting it, Tang In looked up at Winsillin and continued, "To be honest, I don't understand what you rich second generations are thinking. As the saying goes, if you make a mistake, you have to admit it. Since you have been taught a lesson, you should just stay put. Why do you have to learn from children to play revenge, and even bring people over? Ha, is there any point? Why don't you just bring the nanny over? You bastard, shut up. Yo, you're angry out of humiliation." Touching his nose and looking at Winsillin and the others whose faces had turned from black to green, Tang and spread his hands casually. "Well, in fact, what I want to say is, well, since you're already here, then stay." As soon as he finished speaking, a dagger appeared in his hand. His figure flashed. This was taking the initiative to attack. Chapter 950. Since he had decided to take the initiative to attack, Tang In must be confident. But let's not talk about the battle for now. Outside the slums, a luxurious carriage was slowly driving in from the south with a few knights in tow. Why is the carriage shaking so much? Do you know how to drive a carriage? Coachman, coachman. In the constantly shaking carriage, Annika held onto the inner wall of the carriage as she angrily shouted. Betsy opened the curtains and looked outside. She shook her head and advised, "All right, Annika, it's not the coachman's problem. The road is too bumpy." She also leaned out to take a look. She immediately frowned and wanted to say something. The carriage suddenly shook violently again. With a bang, she was jolted back in her seat. She immediately rubbed her, but with a bitter expression, and complained, "So annoying. Why is there such a broken road in Songhai City?" What is the Department of Construction doing? It's normal. This is the slums. Annika was different from the spoiled Annika, who had only been to the slums a few times in her life. Betsy, who was engrossed in business and had traveled extensively, was much calmer even though she had seen many things. She consoled, "Bear with it a little longer. It'll be fine once we take a detour." She paused and said helplessly, "After all, this is our only way out now." That was the truth. When a chaos had erupted in the square, Betsy had immediately sensed that the situation was not good and had decisively left with Annika first. But they had come in a carriage. Before they could even drive out a block, the road was filled with people who had scattered in all directions. When their lives were in danger, the people naturally did not care about the nobles' carriages. Betsy's carriage thus became a sea of people. They could not move forward. This situation was undoubtedly extremely dangerous. If there was any more chaos, the people would definitely not mind overturning a noble's carriage in order to escape. Helpless, after discussing with the knights, the carriage turned around and went in the opposite direction. They did not go to the bustling area of the city, but instead went deeper into the southern part of the city and planned to take a detour. It's all Alan's fault, and that bad guy Philip's fault. Why else would we come and watch such a cruel trial? Otherwise, how would we have ended up in such a state? Seeing that things were set in stone, Annika immediately changed her tone and started complaining about Alan and Selena. Then, she thought of something and asked curiously, "By the way, Sister Betsy, was that Sylvia really burned to death?" Annika was a coward. Even though she had coincidentally arrived at the scene of the trial, she still couldn't bear to close her eyes when the trial platform was lit up. She didn't dare to watch this cruel scene. After hesitating for a moment, Betsy shook her head. "I don't think so. But when I left, I noticed that the people who robbed the execution ground earlier were retreating. This means that Sylvia should have been rescued by someone." "Phew, that's good. Burning someone alive is too cruel." Having never seen the viciousness of the human heart, her heart naturally wouldn't be that hard. Even though Annika knew, from the rumors and the reactions of the crowd, that Sylvia seemed to have committed grave sins, she still couldn't help but heave a sigh of relief when she knew that she hadn't been cruelly burned to death. She patted her chest and comforted herself. Seeing this, Betsy smiled and didn't say anything. She seemed to be in a daze. A few years ago, her personality was similar to her sister's. Born in a noble family, it was inevitable that she would be arrogant and willful, but her heart wasn't that bad. She was even a little naive, like a child, without a clear concept of good and evil. But after experiencing some things, such as the shock of losing a loved one, she knew that in this world, evil people didn't need to be forgiven. They only needed to be hanged. Annika opened her mouth to say something, but swallowed her words when she saw Betsy's expression. She shook her head and was a little puzzled. Why did her usually capable sister like to be in a daze recently? Then, just as the bumpy carriage fell into a short silence, suddenly, boom, a deafening sound suddenly rang out clearly, like a sudden clap of thunder exploding in their ears. It caused Betsy and Annika's delicate bodies to shake at the same time. They couldn't help but reveal a panicked expression as they subconsciously turned to look out the window. They were stunned. In a gray sky not far away, an awe-inspiring wave of air shot up into the sky, straight into the clouds. Then, a large expanse of rolling gray fog followed closely behind, rising and spreading wantonly. It instantly enveloped the entire area, its might truly frightening. Nay, the carriage in front seemed to have been startled by this sudden loud sound, and it immediately neighed loudly, causing the carriage to tremble. Fortunately, the carriage wasn't fast, and the coachman's driving skills weren't bad. After a few moments of fluster and continuous shouting, the carriage finally came to a steady stop. Annika cried out involuntarily. "Oh, what's going on, Sister Betsy?" Annika instantly paled as she grasped the armrest of the seat, her voice trembling as she asked. Betsy also didn't know what had happened, but she was much calmer. After a short moment of panic, she immediately looked at the professionals, the family guards were guarding the carriage. "Miss, We must leave here as soon as possible." The middle-aged guard captain quickly rode his horse closer, his expression solemn. "There should be someone fighting there, and their strength is very high, very high." Betsy was stunned when she heard this. This middle-aged guard captain was one of the few experts in the family, and used to follow her father, the old count. Later, when she took over the family business and needed to run around, the family transferred him to protect her safety. Now, they hadn't even officially met the other party, but he said that the other party's strength was very high. The meaning of this was self-evident. She took a slight breath, decisively opened the door, and ordered, "Abandon the carriage. Quick, Annika! Let's ride the horse and leave in the opposite direction." Pitter-patter-patter. The drifting rain was still stubbornly falling, bringing some refreshment and slightly dispersing the haze that shrouded the city. However, when it fell on the present Wincillin, it only felt abnormally cold and went straight to the bottom of his heart. He didn't know, or rather, he didn't understand what had happened. The middle-aged guard's eyesight was not bad. Not far away, there was indeed a battle between experts, and it was 1 against 3, an extremely rare scene of a chaotic battle between experts of the void level. And since it was 1 against 3, according to common sense, it should be a siege. But now, wiping the rain off his face, it was actually mostly sweat. Enduring the pain of his lower abdomen being kicked, when Wincillin raised his head and looked at old Faye, who had broken through countless walls with his back more than 10 feet away. Under the crazy attacks of a ghostly figure around him, he blocked left and right and screamed continuously. He no longer had the calm look he had before and was in a sorry state. And not far from the two, the gray-robed old man holding a one-handed sword was also not relaxed, his expression dignified and conflicted. Because so long as he stepped forward and interfered in the battle, or even if he didn't interfere, but so long as he revealed a flaw, that ghostly figure would instantly flash over and immediately launch a storm of attacks that forced him to retreat repeatedly. And as soon as he retreated, seeing that there was no advantage to be taken, that ghostly figure instantly flashed back and attacked old Faye again. It was obviously a two-front battle. Even if he was fast enough to not be flustered, it was still a fact that he was besieged. But this fact had no effect on this ghostly figure, that is, Tang. He came and went like the wind, attacking wherever he pointed. There was no pressure, very relaxed. Or it was more than that, because he had also participated in the attack before, which was a three-front battle. But this Tang in still came and went as he pleased, and could even seize the opportunity to kick him, who was relatively the weakest, away. They have the advantage in numbers, but the 3 void level martial artists are suppressed by one person playing around in circles. What clumsy scene! Licking his dry lips, Wincillin muttered to himself, and suddenly there was some fear in his heart that he didn't want to admit. Yes, it was fear. Wincillin boasted that his talent and strength were far beyond the experts of the younger generation. As long as he had a long spear in his hand, he was invincible. This was not narcissism, but a fact. But if he and Tang were in the same position, he didn't think that he could compete with 3 void level martial artists. He was afraid that one would be enough. But what he couldn't do, Tang did it, and he did it very well. Right now, he also had the upper hand, and it seemed that winning was only a matter of time. Why? Is my talent not high enough, and I don't train hard enough? Or am I really not as good as him? Taking a deep breath, Wincillin shook his head to get rid of the blank thoughts in his mind, gritted his teeth, and rushed forward again with the spear. But this time, the cold spear no longer gave him the confidence of invincibility. Chapter 9:51. Dilapidated bungalows, decaying courtyards, thick layers of dust covered every corner. Unknown weeds grew everywhere, and occasionally there were a few swaying, small white flowers, sticking their heads out to welcome the drizzle, washing away the dust. It was obvious that this was the most common abandoned house in the slums. And because it was dilapidated to a certain extent, even homeless people did not visit it, and there was no sign of life. The final fate of buildings like this, was that they were destined to quietly collapse in a gust of wind or a rainy night, erasing all traces of their existence. Oh, that was not necessarily the case. At least at this time, this abandoned building welcomed a living creature, a wild dog that was so thin that it was only skin and bones, with many parts of its fur falling off. It quietly leaped in from a hole in the courtyard wall, tensing its muscles, stepping silently, turning its head from time to time. This wild dog appeared to be very vigilant and very careful. After all, it came out to look for food and did not want to be treated as food. One must know that those starving two-legged creatures, to a certain extent, were much more terrifying than this wild dog. After a while, perhaps because it did not sense any danger, the wild dog's footsteps suddenly became lighter. It trotted around the courtyard, whimpering softly, officially announcing that this place was its safe territory. Of course, although territory was important, food was undoubtedly more important. After being happy for a while, the wild dog cast its gaze towards the dilapidated bungalows. Just as it was about to run in search of food, it suddenly seemed to sense something, and suddenly turned its head to look at the courtyard wall behind it, its eyes becoming vigilant again. Woof! Generally speaking, animals' perception of danger was stronger than humans, let alone a wild dog like this. With a cry, it abandoned the territory it had just occupied and quickly ran towards the hole it came from. The wild dog's reaction was not slow, but unfortunately, before it could run out of the courtyard, boom, the courtyard wall behind it suddenly exploded as if it had been hit by a heavy hammer. In an instant, dust filled the air, and broken bricks flew everywhere, covering the courtyard and the desperate whimpers of the fleeing wild dog. No one cared about the life or death of a wild dog, especially in a situation where one's life could not be guaranteed. Just as the courtyard wall collapsed, whoosh, a tall figure rushed through the gray fog, the courtyard, and with a bang, crashed into the bungalow in a sorry state. Although the tall figure retreated in a sorry state, its speed was extremely fast. However, the figure that passed through the gray fog was even faster, like a ghost, accurately passing through the window of the bungalow and instantly blocking in front of the tall figure. Bang, bang, bang. Too slow, too slow, too slow. You're really too slow. Fists and legs collided, and blades flashed wildly. After a few exchanges of blows, blood splattered everywhere, accompanied by a faint sigh. The ghostly figure that arrived later suddenly reached out and grabbed the tall figure's wrist. Elbowing, stepping, twisting his waist, swinging his arm, a series of actions were completed in an instant. With a bang, the tall figure that was thrown into the air smashed into the wall and fell back into the courtyard. Puff! As soon as he hit the ground, the tall figure immediately opened his mouth and spat out a large amount of blood. However, at this time, he had no time to care about his injuries. He rolled and stood up, waving his hands. Wait a minute, cough cough, why do you keep chasing me? Old Fay was really depressed now. The encirclement plan this time was proposed by Wincillin, and he was also the one who took the lead. Moreover, the only one who had a conflict with Tang Un was Wincillin. However, ever since this Tang Un took the initiative to attack, he had been treating him as his main target and would not let him go. In the end, the one who was hurt the most was him, the accomplice. What kind of logic was this? Why do they keep chasing you? Pushing open the broken wooden door of the house, Tang Un scratched his head and walked out. He did not seem to have thought about this problem. I got it. Because you are very resistant. He clapped his hands and pointed at Old Fay. Tang Un gave a thumbs up to show his praise. Old Fay was dumbfounded when he heard this. He was indeed the strongest among them, and he was also the most resistant. This could be seen from the fact that Tang Un's shadow doppelganger could not break his defense. Therefore, from this point of view, it was reasonable to capture the leader first to capture the bandits. Taking him, who was the strongest, first made sense. However, just because he had the best defense, he became the priority target, which inevitably made Old Fay even more depressed. Do you have any other questions? Or do you still want to say something? Casually taking off the light knight's shoulder armor that was still hanging on his shoulder, Tang raised his terrifying face that was half covered in blood and half covered in black ash, and said softly, "Last words are okay, but please try to be brief. You know, there is not much time." The corner of his mouth twitched, and after a moment of silence, Old Fei suddenly said, "If I leave here now, will you give up the chase?" Tang raised his eyebrows when he heard this. Without waiting to think, a question of shock and anger suddenly came. "Old Fei, do you know what you were talking about?" Winston, with a face full of anger, walked in from a hole in the east wall of the courtyard, and then the gray-clothed old man also appeared on the north wall. Without paying attention to Winston, Old Fei looked at Tang and continued, "Think about it. The one who has a grudge with you is Winston, not us. To be honest, we just happen to be here at the right time, and 2 of us have already died. If you continue to fight like this, maybe you can win in the end, but it will definitely be a tragic victory. After all, we are void-level warriors." He pointed at the gray-clothed old man who seemed to be tempted. "And if you agree, I will leave with him now and not interfere in the grudge between you and Winston. How about it?" "TSK. Sounds like a good suggestion." Touching his chin, Tang turned his head and said, "Damn it, old man, I agree." Without looking at the furious Winston, the gray-clothed old man seemed to be scared. He simply nodded, and then his figure flashed, instantly disappearing from the top of the wall. After all, he was a void-level warrior. If Tang didn't get close to him, it was still very easy for him to leave. He was using practical actions to show his determination to leave. Tang didn't stop him. He just looked at the courtyard wall thoughtfully, then turned his head and looked at Winston with a smile that wasn't a smile. The latter was obviously beyond angry. He didn't understand why in just a short moment, Old Fei and the gray-clothed old man had the idea of betraying him, and in front of him, "Leave? You 2 stupid old men. Do you think that leaving will end this easily? Ridiculous. Think about my family. Think about my sect. You came with me. If anything happens to me, can you stay out of it?" The more he spoke, the angrier he became. His expression was somewhat twisted. Winston stepped in front of Old Fei and pointed his finger at the old man's face. He gritted his teeth and said, "I'm telling you, you are dead. No matter how big the brand is, there is no place for you to hide. For the rest of your lives, you can only wink. Wink for what? Do you still want to fight? Idiot." His Do Chi flashed, and he suddenly pushed Winston away. Old Fei's expression was helpless and speechless. But between his lowered palms, at some point, a thick ice-blue Do Chi had gathered. Right at this moment, the abandoned house behind Twain suddenly exploded and collapsed, and a figure that was completely enveloped by an earthen yellow-colored battle aura was like a galloping chariot that rumbled madly as it dashed over. It was precisely the gray-clothed old man that had just left. And in front of Tang, Old Fei, who had pushed Winston away, also rushed forward. His Do Chi was like a violent wave, covering the sky and the sun. One in front and one behind. The Do Chi was aimed at Tang in the center. At this time, there was no need to say more. Betrayal was just an excuse for Old Fei and the gray-clothed old man to attack. There was no other way. In a mobile battle, Tang's speed was too abnormal. They couldn't even lock onto the target, so how could they attack? But attacking from fixed position was a different matter. As long as they locked onto Tang's position and forced him to face them head-on, Old Fei and the gray-clothed old man didn't believe that with their years of accumulated Do Chi, they wouldn't be able to defeat the young Tang. But it was a pity. Winston, who had been blinded by the thought of betrayal, didn't have the intelligence to keep up. This caused a small flaw to appear in this perfect attack. Old Fei couldn't coordinate with the gray-clothed old man at the first moment. At that time, he was pushing Winston away. Of course, Old Fei could adjust to this momentary flaw. But then again, even Old Fei, who was judged as too slow, could react. So, there was no need to talk about Tang still had time to look at Winston, who was in a daze. He shook his head and laughed. "Huh, looks like you guys don't have good teamwork. Stupid teammates." After he finished speaking, boom, boom, boom. Chapter 952. P.S. The old home had a power outage again, and then you know what happened. Man, the leader of all things was always intelligent, especially those old guys who grew with age. They were even more cunning. This was also an explanation for the saying, old people who don't die are thieves. As for examples, such as the current situation, seeing that they couldn't win with strength, and were even beaten up badly by Tangan. Old Faye decisively changed their strategy and played a trick, intending to win with wisdom and kill with one blow. It had to be said that to be able to make the usually arrogant and powerful Void level masters put down their pride and play a trick to attack together, it already showed the fear of Tang in the hearts of Old Faye and Old Faye. Of course, this was not the main point. The main point was that in order to kill Tang in, Old Faye and Old Faye used all their strength, and the terrible consequences caused in a short moment. The Yellow Chariot's Do-Chi and the Ice Blue Tide's Do-Chi successfully connected in the middle of the courtyard. This was inevitable. Since they used all their strength, even Old Faye and Old Faye couldn't easily stop in such a short distance, and they didn't dare to have the thought of stopping, because once there was a problem with the cooperation, they would die in the hands of the opposite side. So, no matter what the result was, they could only brace themselves and fight. Boom! 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 The thunder shook the world, and the moment the two-colored Do-Chi collided, everyone's mind was buzzing, and they couldn't hear any other sound. The ground under their feet trembled as if it was about to collapse. Even the drizzle that had been constantly falling seemed to be unable to withstand the terrifying power of this place, and took the initiative to avoid it, and disappeared in an instant. This was just the beginning. Then, a series of faint black ripples began to appear in the sky above the house, some big and some small, cutting through the void. At first glance, this side of the sky was like a rag that had been used for a long time, wrinkled and twisted, unusually strange and ugly. The few people present were all masters, so they naturally knew what the situation was. To put it simply, this sudden burst of terrifying power had already exceeded the limits of this space. So, the space began to collapse. The instant the spatial ripples appeared on the ground, a strange ring-shaped airwave with a diameter of over 30 meters appeared out of thin air and enveloped the abandoned house. Immediately after, the two-colored light officially collided, and the strange ring-shaped air wave spread out, wave after wave. Looking at it with the naked eye, the spreading speed was not fast, but the power was catastrophic. He raised his line of sight and looked down. With the abandoned house as the center, wherever the airwaves swept past, the ground trembled, the houses trembled, and the walls of the alleys trembled. Everything was trembling and swaying nonstop, as if they were dancing to some unknown rhythm. Then, as he jumped, the wall fell, the house collapsed, and the ground cracked, spread, and continued to spread. Previously, because of Tang Un's annoying close combat, Old Man Faye and Old Man Faye were unable to use their powerful battle chi. Now that he was finally able to use his full strength, he was naturally able to unleash this terrifying attack that was comparable to a natural disaster. But where was the target, which was Tang In? Oh, right now he was standing in the corner of the courtyard, holding his chin and looking around, looking at the sky and the ground, while smacking his lips and sighing silently. It seemed like he was admiring something and was overflowing with interest. Perhaps it was similar to the principle that the center of the storm was the safest. The surrounding 100 meters had been reduced to a complete mess and was full of devastation. But this abandoned house, other than the place where Old Man Faye and Old Man Faye were fighting, was safe and sound. Standing on top of the ruins, not a single tile was broken. Thus, Tang In, who had successfully escaped in time and was now in the house, was naturally unharmed. It had to be said that this scene was really absurd, like a funny one-man show. It was also like on the battlefield. In order to defeat a powerful enemy, two allies formed a strategic alliance and made some pre-battle preparations, finally leading the other party into a trap. In the end, when the net was pulled, The enemy was gone, but they were fighting fiercely. Moreover, it was not just funny. Old Man Fei and Old Man Fei were undoubtedly experts, and an all-out attack from an expert was naturally not easy to take, even if the strength of both sides were about the same. Almost at the same time, less than 3 meters away, the trembling Old Man Fei and Old Man Fei suddenly opened their mouths and spat out large mouthfuls of blood. Even so, the two, whose expressions were slightly distorted, did not choose to stop. Just as they said before, they did not dare to stop. The Doqi that had gathered around the two had reached an extremely terrifying level, and it was not something they could control. Now, if one side stopped, they would be able to protect the other, but they would suffer a terrifying backlash and lie down as corpses. Outsiders like Tang In and Wensilin also did not dare to interfere, because once they found an outlet, this terrifying power would surge out and cause devastating consequences. Of course, if the outsider was strong enough, for example, the sword god Wu Ding, there might be a perfect ending with a strong intervention. But of course, this was impossible. There was only one sword god, and he was still sitting on a barren mountain outside the capital, so it was naturally impossible for him to come here. Excluding other things, the only safe way was to wait. When most of this terrifying power had been released and slowly subsided, Old Man Fei and Old Man Fei would retreat at the same time, and they should be able to minimize the damage from the backlash. As for now, the two could only look at each other and smile bitterly, and then compete to see who would vomit more blood. Okay. Crack, crack. Cracking his fingers, Tangin took a step forward in the strong wind, loosened his muscles, and looked at Wensilin with a smile. It's rare that no one disturbs us, so I think we need to have a good chat. And what do you think? Wensilin's expression changed when he heard this, and he subconsciously took a step back. Then, he felt that this action was too cowardly, so he retracted it again and glared back fiercely, provoking, "Okay, as long as you dare to come." Although his appearance was tough, Wensilin could not help but feel nervous. He had now completely recognized the reality and knew that he was no match for Tang In alone. Old Man Fei and Old Man Fei were now in a deadlock, and it was impossible for them to come and help him. He immediately regretted that he had been too stupid just now, and regretted that he had brought too few experts this time. Seeing Wensilin's expression change in such a short time, Tang In naturally knew what he was thinking. He smiled and said no more. His figure flashed, and he disappeared from where he was. "You lunatic!" Wensilin panicked when he saw this, and retreated until his back was against the wall of the courtyard. His provocation just now was not just to maintain his face. This courtyard was indeed extremely dangerous. If he was not careful, it could easily break the balance and cause this abandoned courtyard to follow in the footsteps of the ruins last time, and not even a speck of dust would remain. But Tang In did not care at all. Even without the help of blood energy, Doqi, and other powers, Tang In was confident that he could beat Wensilin to a pulp with just his fists and legs. And the reality was indeed so. He flashed in an instant, and simply punched towards Wensilin's face. "You know what? You make me a little jealous." Wensilin decisively abandoned his spear, which was useless in close combat. He did not have time to think about what his opponent was jealous of. He swung his elbow to parry, and with a bang, his right knee quietly and viciously pushed forward. As the disciple of the god of swords, Wensilin's strength was naturally not limited to weapons. His fists and legs were not weak either, but he did not use them often. Unfortunately, he had met Tang In this time. Tang In did not know any other world's fists and legs, but his eyesight was brilliant and he was fast. It was enough to have these advantages. As if he had expected this, he lifted his leg and pressed down, easily removing the knee strike. "Look, you have a good background, good luck, and good talent." He turned his fist into a palm, and then his palm into a blade. He slashed down diagonally, and with a hiss, he cut through Wensilin's bent elbow defense. He stepped forward and swung his fist. "Especially your appearance. It really makes people want to beat you up when they see you." Bang! With a muffled grunt, when Silen's body was instantly sent flying, and a white tooth spun into the air. He chased after him again. Tangan frowned slightly and sighed faintly. I don't understand. Since the heavens love you so much and practically let you have everything, why are you still not satisfied? He took half a step back and parried Silen's heavy punch, which was pouncing on him like a tiger. Why are you still provoking me? Don't you know that I have a bad temper? When I'm angry, even I'm afraid of myself. He flicked his wrist slightly and reached out. Like a butterfly flying through flowers, he passed through the heavy punches and grabbed Silen's collar. He turned around and threw him to the ground. Boom! Chapter 953. A large number of facts had proven that the warriors of the other world were indeed not good at close combat and martial arts. Of course, this was also a normal situation. The other world was not the modern world. Here, there was Do Chi, a unique power that could overturn mountains and seas and cause large-scale damage. So, who would go and painstakingly practice some martial arts? Just like when a longbow and a machine gun were placed in front of you, even an ordinary person with no combat experience would know to choose the machine gun. This was an inevitable choice. But Tang En, a different person from the modern world, came to this other world with a unique assassin system. And now, it was a narrow space where he could not use Do Chi and there was nowhere to hide. So, Silen was in a tragedy. In terms of real strength, Silen was not Tang En's opponent. And in terms of martial arts, he was more than 3 streets ahead of him. As soon as they started fighting, it was a one-sided crushing scene. Furthermore, Tang En was so despicable. Well, it could also be jealousy. He did not know the rule of not hitting someone in the face. 8 out of 10 punches were aimed at Silen's handsome face. The peach blossoms bloomed brilliantly. In a short while, Silen's appearance completely changed. His cheeks were swollen, his eyes were dark, the corners of his mouth were crooked, and his face was green and red. Even if his mother was here, she would not be able to recognize that this pig head was her handsome and carefree, precious son. What's wrong with you? Kill me. SSS. You're F*King killing me? You're F*King killing me. His mouth leaked air, and the same sentence was said with 2 different meanings. Silen, who was lying on the ground, had never been so humiliated. At first, he was still protecting his vital parts, but later, he vaguely understood that the other party did not intend to immediately take his life, but intended to continuously humiliate him. His psychological defense immediately collapsed. Silly. Silly for what? Slightly stunned, Tang En could not help but give him a thumbs up. Good. You're manly enough. A real man. But you still dare to scold me like this. Looks like I went easy on you. After saying that, he leaned over and punched. SSS. What's wrong with you? No. Kill me. F*CK. You want to compete with me? Are you addicted to scolding me? Flustered and exasperated, he raised his leg and kicked furiously. Japanese wine. Your mother? F*CK. I finally understand. You're courting death. What a farce. Tang En did not seem to have any intention of taking Winston's life immediately. Therefore, even though the latter had a pig's head and was screaming in pain, most of his injuries were just external injuries. At most, he had a few broken ribs. It was not a big deal. However, there was no longer any suspense about the outcome of this battle. Winston's life was in Tang En's hands, and it could be decided in a matter of seconds. Seeing this situation, Old Man Fei and Old Man Fei looked at each other with bitterness in their eyes. As if he had decided on something, Old Fei's gaze turned resolute as he stared at the gray-robed old man. The latter was silent for a moment before he nodded gently. Just as Silen said earlier, Old Fei and Old Man Fei couldn't just watch Silen die in front of them. Otherwise, even if they managed to escape, they wouldn't be able to withstand the mountain-like pressure from the Silen family and their sect. Therefore, they could only choose to save him. At this time, a lot of the terrifying Do Chi between the two had already been released. Of course, there was still a lot left. At this time, it was not impossible for them to withdraw and attack, but they would have to pay a price. However, they didn't have a choice, right? After making up their minds, Old Faye and Old Man Faye suddenly shouted and took a step to the side with tacit understanding. They both withdrew their right hands. As soon as they left, the two-colored do-chi flickered and suddenly fluctuated, as if it would explode in the next moment. This strange movement caused Old Faye and Old Man Faye's bodies to sway nonstop. Both of them spat out large amounts of blood. Their faces were ashen, and it was as if they had aged 10 years in an instant. However, even so, Old Faye and Old Man Faye's left palms were still as steady as a rock. They fiercely slapped one side of the two-colored do-chi. Whoosh! Like a flood that opened a gate, like a dam that was about to collapse, the two-colored do-chi instantly fell to one side. It was like a snow-white blade, and also like a line of fatal ripples that spread out in an unstoppable manner. The direction of the ripples of the blade was precisely where Tang Un was. If it swept past, Tang In would definitely be cut in half at the waist. As for Wincillin, he would be able to luckily escape this calamity because he was holding his head with both hands and lying on the ground. However, as long as Tang Un was in battle, he would be able to keep his eyes and ears open to all directions. Of course, he would not be so easily hit. In reality, when Old Faye and Old Man Faye were shouting, Tang In simply leaped over the courtyard wall with a trail of afterimages and disappeared. Puff! In a short breath, the ripples swept past, and the only intact courtyard wall that was still standing was like a pile of flour. It instantly turned into ashes, and the spectacular ruins behind it were revealed. At the same time, Old Faye and Old Man Faye both let out a muffled groan. Their left palms that were pushing the two-colored do-chi suddenly trembled violently. Their skin, flesh, and bones layer by layer, they completely melted away at a speed visible to the naked eye. It was a shocking sight. Not only that, after more than half of their arms had melted away, the backlash continued to spread to their chests and necks. Roar! A large amount of blood spilled out. Old Faye and Old Man Faye roared like a tiger and decisively retreated. Then, they quickly rushed forward. Let's go. They grabbed Wincillin's lapels and ran out in the opposite direction with the other gray-clothed old man. They quickly left this abandoned courtyard. This time, they were truly retreating. Old Faye and Old Man Faye did not think that this attack would be able to kill Tang In. Perhaps the power of the two-colored do-chi was enough, but it would be useless if they could not catch up to him in speed. Therefore, they only wanted to use this opportunity to force Tang In away and buy more time to retreat. And in fact, they had indeed done it. However, this so-called retreat also had a condition. Young Master Wincillin, this is all that we two old men can do. As they flew away, Old Faye's expression was solemn as he said solemnly, "Next, we will split up and leave it to fate." No one wanted to die, and the older they were, the more afraid they were of death. Old Faye and Old Man Faye were very clear that although they had temporarily forced Tang In away, with the other party's teleportation technique, it would not take long for him to easily catch up. And the one who had a grudge with Tang Un was only Wincillin. Therefore, if they ran with Wincillin, they would definitely die. The only thing they could do now was to split up and escape. Only then could they protect themselves. Of course, they cannot be blamed for being heartless. In fact, they had indeed done what they could. Not to mention anything else, just to save Wincillin from Tang In's hands, Old Faye and Old Man Faye had paid an extremely painful price. Not only did they lose an arm that could never be recovered, but they also suffered serious internal injuries caused by the backlash of their do-chi. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that after this matter, their cultivation realms would definitely fall. Their lifespans would also suffer quite a bit of damage. Looking at it from a different perspective, this price would also be enough for them to confidently face the blame and pressure of the Wincillin family and their masters when they returned. Hiss. What do you mean? Wincillin obviously had not completely recovered from the humiliation just now. His teeth were leaking as he asked in a daze. Old Faye saw this and sighed softly. He did not open his mouth to explain. A mocking laugh suddenly came from afar. Ha ha, IQ is a shortcoming. It really is a sad thing. Idiot, is it not obvious enough? They're going to abandon you and run away. Their expressions changed greatly. Old Fay and Old Man Fay suddenly turned their heads and saw that the nightmarish figure of the devil had already appeared in the abandoned house behind them. This speed was too abnormal. They both groaned in despair in their hearts. Old Fay and Old Man Fay looked at each other. They no longer had any thoughts of leaving things to chance. They suddenly pushed Wincillin and quickly scattered to the left and right. They looked up to the sky and roared, "Run!" With the push of Old Fay and Old Man Fay, Wincillin's speed was as fast as a ghost. In an instant, he had left the abandoned field that was more than 1,000 feet under his feet. The whistling of the wind in his ears finally woke him up completely. He understood the situation at hand and immediately cried out, "Don't abandon me. Come back, come back." Of course, Old Fay and the old man would not go back to court death. Instead, they watched as the two one-armed figures on the left and right quickly left their line of sight. Huh! Tang Yin stood in the abandoned house and nodded, chuckling with satisfaction. He did not chase after them, nor would he chase after them. In fact, from the moment Tang Yin took the initiative to attack, he did not have much hope of killing Old Fay and Old Man Fay. He only wanted to scare them away. After all, they were void-level powerhouses. If it was a one-on-one fight, Tang Yin was confident that he could make them all stay. For example, Enchilua and the chubby Old Man Fay. But if the three of them attacked together, Tang Yin would not be able to do it. The chaotic battle just now also proved this point. If Tang Yin went all out, he could take the initiative and even gain a small advantage. But if he wanted to really win, it would not be so easy. At least, it was not something that could be done in a short time without paying a price. What's more, if the void-level powerhouses saw that the situation was not good and wanted to retreat, Tang Yin really could not stop them. At most, he could only make one of them stay. In this way, there was naturally no need to continue the battle. It was also because he knew this point that Tang Yin changed his style of sneak attacks. Storm, Shadow Doppelganger, Permethought Teleportation, and other big moves were used one after another. He was strong and aggressive, taking the initiative to attack. Sometimes he did not even hesitate to exchange injury for injury, crazily attacking. He successfully created a psychological illusion for Old Fay and the others, infinitely increasing Tang Yin's strength, gradually reducing their chances of winning. They only felt that the opponent was unfathomable. If they continued to fight, they would very likely die here like their previous two companions. When humans think, God laughs. They were not afraid of not thinking, but they were afraid of thinking too much. With such negative thoughts piling up, Old Fay and Old Man Fay lost the confidence to fight. Of course, there was also Wincillin's contribution. With such a pig teammate, it was hard to have any confidence in winning. Well, the details were really subtle and complicated. To put it simply, Tang Yin's plan succeeded. He successfully scared away the two void-level powerhouses. Now, he could not be disturbed and have a good chat with the victim who would not let go, which was Wincillin. He had been looking forward to that scene for a long time. Chapter 954. After a bustling morning, Songhai City finally calmed down as the sea of people in the southern city square dispersed. Of course, this was only relative. After the panicked citizens ran to a safe area, they could not help but spread what they had seen and guess loudly. There were also some who had unfortunately lost their children in the chaos, and they were frantically asking around. Apart from that, some temple knights in silver armor were also searching around the city, as if they were trying to capture something at this moment at the southern city gate. A group of dozens of people holding various weapons hurried over. They looked at the undefended city gate and panted heavily as they stopped in their tracks. If a passerby had been to the scene of the previous trial, they would have recognized this group of people as the group of strong people who had robbed the execution ground. "Sir, the city gate is not closed. We can charge out." "Good. Rest for 5 minutes and let the brothers catch their breath. Then we will charge out. Years of peace and tranquility, without any weapons, made the defenses of the southern city of the Brand practically non-existent. However, this also benefited Owens and the others who had just retreated from the southern city square. Our luck is not bad. Luckily, the other party did not take any precautions. Phew. However, Owens, will Sylvia really be all right? An old man dressed in a plain long robe, dressed as a magician, asked worriedly as he panted. Don't worry, she'll be fine. After all, he was a warrior, and Owens had no problems with his physical strength. He then turned to look at the southern sky and thought of the miracle that had appeared there. He chuckled and muttered to himself, it's still the same move. Haha, I've long known that the relationship between the two of you was not normal. Since he's already made his move, you shouldn't be in any danger. What? Oh, nothing. Let's get ready. We'll be constantly being hunted down, so we have to hurry back to the north. That's the safest place for blasphemers like us. Owens shook his head and paused for a while. His tone was somewhat self-deprecating. The Temple of Light's influence was intertwined and vaguely had the power to cover the entire Bran Empire. However, the area of influence that he could truly command was the south of Bran. After all, this was where the temple headquarters was located. In the past, Owens and the others were proud of the status quo. But now, it had become a fatal noose around their necks. It had to be said that this was a great irony. As soon as he finished speaking, the atmosphere became slightly gloomy. Other than Owens, who was a holy head commander, the rest of the people here were mostly Puritans and monks. Their faith in the gods was deep in their bones, and they were loyal to the temple. However, he never expected that he would become a heretic like a blasphemer and the source of the chaos in the temple. He was being hunted down by his own people. He was really at a loss. As soon as the words left his mouth, Owens knew that it was a little inappropriate. So he cleared his throat and waved his hand to change the topic. Let's go. Let's leave the city first. He paused for a moment, and his expression changed. Swoosh! A blurry figure flashed past in the gray sky, several hundred meters above his head, instantly passing over the tall city wall and disappearing. His speed was very fast, but he seemed to be in a sorry state. A void-level warrior? Lowering his head and looking at the blood dripping on the street, not far away, Owens's mouth curled up. He seemed to understand something. Haha, he's just a defeated dog. Let's go. Sylvia has no problem. We'll leave first. In the South City District, the pursuit continued. Of course, 30 years to the east, 30 years to the west. It was different from the previous pursuit. This time, the target of the pursuit had been changed. The departure of Old Faye and the other person had undoubtedly extinguished Sealand's thoughts. Now, not to mention killing Tang Yin, whether or not he could escape from this slum was a problem. However, although Old Faye and the other person had left, Sealand would not fight alone. This was for sure. After all, he was the most promising direct descendant of a great noble family. Even in most cases, with Sealand's strength, he did not need anyone to protect him. However, he would not lack people to protect him wherever he went. For example, the Earth-level expert who had died in Tang On's hands earlier. In a remote street, a few guards had just turned the corner when a figure suddenly swept past them like a gust of wind. All that was left was a fleeing figure and a hurried order from afar. Stop him, stop him. When we return, I will reward you greatly. Young master? Stunned for a moment, the guards recognized the identity of the fleeing figure. They subconsciously turned their heads and looked at the empty street in front of them. They scratched their heads. Stop who? Just as they finished speaking, a ghostly figure drew a beautiful arc at the end of the street. As if drifting, it brought up the puddles on the ground. Its speed did not decrease as it rushed over. And behind him, a few figures that were very slow in comparison were bitterly chasing after him. Stop him. Quick, the brothers in front. Stop him. There was no doubt now. The guards heard the voice and quickly spread out, blocking the street. With their companions in the distance, one in front and one behind, they attacked the ghostly figure. Those who could become guards of a great aristocratic family were naturally not ordinary people. At least in the profession of guards, they were considered the best. Of course, in the eyes of a person of Tang En's level of strength, such outstanding people were meaningless. Just like the fighting rooster of a rooster, it would never be able to enter the eyes of an eagle. The two sides were not on the same level at all, of course. Wen Xin also understood this principle. He did not expect these guards to be lucky enough to kill Tang En. This was too unrealistic. Previously, he had ordered these guards to scatter in the slums only to act as eyes. As for now, his expectations were even lower. He only hoped that these guards could delay Tang En for a moment. Or more accurately, it was the few seconds that Tang En needed to kill these guards. So, he was perfectly satisfied. However, Wen Xin was destined to be disappointed. Tang En did not kill anyone, nor did he waste even a breath of time. He only flashed when the two sides were about to come into contact, easily appearing outside the encirclement and continuing to move forward. It was still the same sentence. The two sides were not on the same level. So many thoughts could only be overthought. Ah, the game is over, my young master. Looking at Wen Xin's sorry figure, meeting his panicked and fearful gaze, Tang En smiled calmly. He casually made a throat-slitting gesture and instantly closed the distance between them. Ah, it was a very interesting and common phenomenon. In a chase, the person who was about to be caught would always like to suddenly stop and change directions, then run in another direction. It was as if, because of this turn, they felt that they could get rid of their pursuers. Right now, Wen Xin was just like that. Twain was clearly still 100 feet away from him, but he seemed as if he was about to be grabbed by Twain's hand. He suddenly stopped and changed directions. With a boom, he crashed into a house on the side of the street. Shaking his head, Tang En moved his feet and followed closely behind. That feeling was just an illusion. His speed could not compare, but could a turn make up for the difference? Wasn't this a little too naive? However, Wen Xin obviously did not think so. Boom, boom, boom. Like a giant python that accidentally broke into a narrow ditch, he rampaged all the way, causing dust to fill the air, as if he wanted to use this to cross to another street. Seeing this, Tang En could not help but frown. It was not that Wen Xin's actions really had any effect, but there was too much dust covering each other's figures. It was a little troublesome. However, this was easy to solve. Leaping onto a tall courtyard wall, he narrowed his eyes and observed. Then, like Batman, Tang En jumped on the eaves, balconies, walls, and other objects, moving forward in a straight line. Soon, he was in front of Wen Xin, who was addicted to tearing down walls. Immediately, after making a rough judgment, he descended into an abandoned courtyard. "Get out of the way, boy, this is my territory." As soon as he landed, a big man with disheveled hair and a dirty face suddenly raised a wooden stick and fiercely rushed out from the corner, waving it and threatening. Paying no attention to this tramp, Tang En strolled to the bottom of the courtyard wall, waving his finger as if waiting for something. "Do you want to have your dog legs broken?" Seeing this, the tramp was instantly furious, raising the wooden stick high as he strode closer. At this moment, the intruder who was listening attentively raised the corner of his mouth. "Pa!" He snapped his fingers and kicked out. Boom! Ah! Gravel flew everywhere, mixed with a cry of surprise and a miserable howl. The center of the courtyard wall suddenly burst open, dust flying everywhere. Then, a series of collapsing sounds came one after another. It was unknown how many walls this kick had gone through. Ah! Bang! The wooden stick fell to the ground. The tramp stood in place, staring blankly at the intruder who easily retracted his leg from the huge hole in the wall. With a gulp, he swallowed with difficulty. Buzz, a shiny gold coin fell in a charming arc beside the big man's feet, spinning rapidly. "Sorry, I broke your courtyard wall. This is the maintenance fee." Stepping into the hole in the wall, Tang En did not care about the surprised cheers behind him. Once again, he lifted his foot and stepped through a hole in the alley, continuing to move forward. After crossing several holes in a row, his gaze passed through the last hole in the wall and what appeared in front of him was a relatively spacious street. Well, when Scyllin's previous rampage had really hit another block, at the bottom of the last hole in the wall, when Scyllin's figure did not appear, it seemed that he had already gotten up and fled. However, this did not matter. In such a short period of time, he could not have run far. A teleportation would be enough. However, at this moment, suddenly the sound of horses neighing suddenly came from outside the hole in the wall, and the sound of horse hooves came to a sudden halt. Then who are you? He wants to steal the horse. Be careful. Protect the young lady. Do it, kill him. A series of warning shouts, accompanied by the sound of a human body falling to the ground, instantly turned into a mess. Tang In frowned slightly when he heard this. He stepped through the last hole in the wall and stepped onto the street. He turned his head, laughed arrogantly. The heavens did not abandon me. The heavens did not abandon me. Chase if you have the ability. Continue to chase. Look who this is. Ha! As he was told, he looked at the woman who was held hostage by the hysterical and excited Scyllin. Annie? His expression did not change. Tang In shook his head and sighed. Oh, my young master, you really make me angry. Chapter 955. Anika felt that she was extremely unlucky and should not have gone out today. Previously, because of the plan to catch the mistress, his mood wasn't too good. Later, he found out that it was a misunderstanding. However, he had already arrived at an inexplicable trial venue. Then, he had to watch the cruel show of burning a person alive in fear. Of course, in the end, he didn't dare to watch. He also heard that the female criminal had been rescued. However, her mood did not improve because of this. Due to the chaos in the square, their carriage was blocked by countless people and was in a precarious situation. Although they decided to take a detour, they were once again on a bumpy road, and the bumpy road was very painful. If that was all, they could endure it and it would be over. However, something unexpected happened, and they had no choice but to abandon the carriage and get on their horses and take another detour. It was in such a sorry state that Annika saw a scene from her dream that she would remember for the rest of her life. Following a series of deafening booms, a two-colored, resplendent shock wave chased after them, spreading out in all directions with a terrifying might. Following that, walls collapsed, houses collapsed, and the ground caved in. In a short period of time, a terrifying ruin that spanned over 300 meters was formed right before her eyes. It was as if doomsday had arrived and a natural disaster had suddenly appeared, causing her body to turn cold and her heart to turn cold. Luckily, Big Sister Betsy was beside her and helped her in time. Otherwise, Anika would definitely have been thrown to the ground by the startled horses and mercilessly trampled on. Without a doubt, this scene deeply shocked and stimulated Annika, causing her to be unable to recover from her shock for a long time. However, misfortune did not let her off easily because of her weakness. She thought that she had run to a safe area, but on a spacious street not far from the entrance of the slums, a figure covered in blood suddenly appeared in front of her. He easily sent the guard beside him flying and snatched a horse. In her daze, Annika didn't hear the guard's warning roar at all. She only knew how to scream. Perhaps it was because of this scream that it attracted the attention of that bloody figure. He turned his head to look and seemed to be startled for a moment. Then he suddenly threw his head back and laughed loudly as he pounced over. After a moment of dizziness, when Anika opened her eyes again, she found that she had already left the horse and was standing on the street. The guards surrounded him with all kinds of weapons in their hands, their faces full of vigilance. Sister Becky was standing behind the guard, looking anxiously in their direction. What's going on? What's that smell? Finally, due to the pressure on her neck and the pungent smell of blood that filled her nose, Annika was completely awake. Blinking my eyes, I'm being held hostage. In an instant, an icy chill rapidly spread from his tailbone, and his four limbs immediately stiffened. Immediately after, a mess of thoughts surged into his mind. I've been held hostage. I'm going to die. No, it's just a kidnapping. What do they want? Money? Here, I'll give you whatever you want. He doesn't lack money. Sob, sob. Will he take advantage of me? I'm so pretty. No, I just got engaged. In all honesty, this really wasn't a lie. A spoiled, noble lady who had never seen the dark side of the world had such a heaven-defying and unreasonable line of thought. It was also because of this that when a figure walked out from the hole in the wall and appeared in Annika's line of sight, she didn't notice at all, nor did she hear what the other party was saying. At this time, she was secretly raising her head and forcing herself to look at the villain holding her hostage. In an instant, her beautiful eyes widened. An ear-piercing scream. Ah, pig-head monster! The scene was silent. After a moment, the calm Tang couldn't hold it in anymore and held his forehead. Damn, where did Alan find such a perfect lover? Be drunk, shut up. Winston, who was laughing maniacally, was stunned when he heard this and almost choked himself. After he reacted, his pig-like face instantly became as black as the bottom of a pot. What did you say? Sir, Annika didn't understand Winston's leaked words in his anger. She hesitated for a moment and tried to ask in a trembling voice. However, when she raised her head and looked at the somewhat familiar pig-like face, she was instantly stunned. You're Sir Winston? All right. Although this noble lady's brain didn't seem to work very well, her eyesight was still pretty good. From the swollen, pig-like face, she could recognize that this was Winston, who had come to the manor a few times a few days ago. However, this questioning tone was undoubtedly a second, merciless blow to Winston. The corner of Winston's eyes twitched a few times. He simply grabbed Annika's neck and choked the words she wanted to say. Ugh. Stop. Betsy panicked when she saw this. She separated the palms of the guards and tried to calm the agitated Winston down a little. Sir, since you know Annika, then everything is easy to talk about. No matter the reason, you can tell us your request first. As long as we can do it, we can discuss it. Obviously, Betsy saw Winston as a robber and thought that he was after the huge wealth of the Allen Merchant Group. Winston reluctantly closed his swollen mouth and slowed down. He glanced disdainfully and looked at Tang, who was not far away. Is that so? My request is very simple. Hiss, I want it dead. Can you help me do that? Betsy and the others heard this and turned to look at Tang in shock. They could not help but feel bitter in their hearts. Only then did they understand that they seemed to have been unjustly implicated. Not only did you make me angry, you also disappointed me. Stepping forward, Tang did not care about Betsy and the others. He looked at Winston and spread his hands calmly. Using an innocent woman to talk about things. Is this the demeanor of the sword god's disciple? Don't come over, stop. Winston, who was very clear about Tang speed, grabbed Annika's neck tightly and retreated vigilantly. Innocent? If you think she's innocent, you can just do it. But I'd like to see how you explain this to your good friend Alan after this. Alan? This matter also involved Alan? Annika, who was extremely frightened, heard this familiar name and could not help but look at Tang subconsciously. She blinked in confusion and thought to herself, why does Alan have so many good friends recently, and I don't know any of them? As expected, he's still hiding something from me. Annika, whose thoughts had started to wander again, did not notice Tang on slightly narrowed eyes. She casually turned her head and said, Explain? Why should I explain? I've always liked to do good deeds without leaving my name. Well, at most, I'll leave the name of Layphone. After a slight pause, Winston's body suddenly tensed up because the last sentence was said by his ear, and not far in front of him, Tang was still standing there with his eyes narrowed and his head turned eye. Even though he did not know what kind of martial arts technique this was, Winston, who had seen Tang and Shadow Clone before, knew that he had been careless. Or rather, it was impossible to defend against this. And once Annika closed in, Winston knew that he had no chance. His gaze turned fierce, and he instantly became bold. He was about to break Annika's throat. However, before the order from his brain could be transmitted to his palm through his nerves, his wrist was grabbed tightly by a hand that reached out from behind him. On the side, Betsy and the others suddenly let out a short scream. It was not because Annika was in a dangerous situation, but because they suddenly saw a familiar figure appear behind Winston like a ghost without any warning. And from the corner of their eyes, that familiar figure was clearly still standing not far away. Bang! Winston's pig-headed face was hit again. Blood splattered everywhere, and he was instantly sent flying to the side of the street, smashing a sizable hole in the ground. Tang expressionlessly chased after him again. He casually grabbed the leg that was struggling to kick at him, swung his arm, and smashed it violently in all directions. Boom, boom, boom. Crushed stones and blood flew everywhere, mixed with Winston's miserable cries. This violent scene made Annika, Betsy, and the others, who had yet to recover from their shock, stare blankly. Previously, when Winston suddenly appeared, he had casually sent the middle-aged guard captain flying. With just this attack, Betsy and the others knew that they had met a powerful expert. This was also the reason why they did not dare to attack, even though they had surrounded him just now. But now, that powerful expert was being held in someone's hand like a broken sack. Facing the street, facing the stairs, facing the sculptures on the side of the road, and so on, he was casually smashing them. In a daze, Betsy and the others finally understood how this powerful expert's pig-headed face came about. If he was smashed like this, forget about being pig-headed. Even if he did not die, he would be a true, powerful expert. Chapter 956. Boom, boom, boom. The brutal smashing continued. Tang was like a primitive human who had walked out of the wilderness. With great strength and patience, he chopped and chopped, constantly opening up his own world. In a short while, this side of the street was full of holes and had completely changed its appearance. And at this moment, suddenly, "Ah, ha! You don't dare to kill me! Ah, you don't dare to kill me! You don't dare! Ha!" Winston, who was badly mutilated and did not look like a human, seemed to have suddenly figured something out. He laughed crazily like a madman. His hand movements paused. Tang tilted his head and thought for a moment. Then he threw Winston out like he was throwing garbage. With a boom, stone chips flew. Winston was completely sunk into the steps in front of a shop. His chest heaved up and down. His body was like a broken water bag, bleeding everywhere. However, although his condition was miserable, Winston's expression was strangely relaxed. He opened his mouth, revealing the few remaining moving teeth. He laughed crazily. "I was right. You don't dare to kill me. You're afraid. Huff. You're afraid of my family and my sex revenge. Am I right? Ha, you also know fear. Not all of it, my young master." Twain bent down and swept his gaze over Winston's body. He found a clean spot and wiped the blood that had splashed on his hand. His gaze was calm. "Not killing you was the right thing to do. Everything else was wrong. Don't you understand? My opponent is only your master, sword god Wuding. As for you, you're not worthy. You're just a small stone to ease the conflict between us. It's necessary to have you, but it doesn't matter if you don't have you. With such a small role, is it worth being so excited and arrogant? Ha! It seems that your arrogance is really low." Suddenly, the crazed laughter stopped abruptly. Winston lay down. His eyes, which were the only intact part of his body, were no longer arrogant and happy. Instead, they were filled with unwillingness and resentment. Although Tang's statement was a little exaggerated, the truth was more or less like this. Winston treated Tang as his opponent and made many preparations for this. But who would have thought that in the end, it was just wishful thinking? Thinking back to what Philip had said before, many people knew about his operation this time, but few were optimistic about him. Strangely, Winston suddenly wanted to laugh. He wasn't laughing at others, but at himself. He was laughing at how laughable he was. However, at this moment, Tang made a gesture that made him cry. With a flip of his hand, he flashed a pitch-black dagger and took one of Winston's arms. His tone was still calm. "Of course, please don't misunderstand. Not killing you doesn't mean that I will let you go. You have to know that you're narrow-minded, but I'm also narrow-minded. I won't allow others to throw sand in my eyes. Pause for a while. The tip of the dagger touched Winston's wrist, and the corners of his mouth curled up slightly. I don't dare to kill you. Haha. Do you know that there are many things in this world that are more terrifying than death? Today, I'll let you experience it. As soon as he finished speaking, the tip of his blade flicked. With a hiss, Winston's arm suddenly trembled, like a fish that had jumped onto the riverbank. He opened his mouth wide and trembled nonstop. Ah, don't be nervous. It's only a little painful. Come, give me your other arm. Casually throwing away his limp, dead fish-like hand, Tang spoke gently and reached out to grab Winston's other arm. At this moment, the latter seemed to understand his intentions. He curled up his body and howled miserably as he resisted with all his might. But of course, this couldn't stop anything. After struggling for a moment, Tang easily grabbed Winston's other arm and raised the dagger again. I'm just cutting the tendons in your hand. I said don't be nervous. Hey, if you move again, I'll be nervous. I might cut your artery and cause massive bleeding. It's done. See, I was right. It doesn't hurt at all. Then keep up the good work. Next is your right leg. His faint voice sounded a little benevolent as he was trying his best to persuade her. But to Annika and Betsy, who were standing at the side in a daze, it was as if a demon's voice entered their ears. They couldn't help but shudder and subconsciously move back to hide behind the guard. At this moment, the guard's expression wasn't any better. He watched as Tang smiled and comforted him while waving the dagger casually and cutting the tendons in Winston's arms and legs with precision. With a gulp, he swallowed with great difficulty. This wasn't the end. Putting away the dagger, Tang leaned over and watched Winston groan in pain as he leaned against his waist and abdomen. Tang stretched out his hands again. Have you heard of the saying of a small dark room and confinement? It's like throwing a person into a small, narrow room where there's no wind and no light. When you raise your hand, you won't be able to see your fingers. When you tilt your ear, you won't be able to hear anything. It's like you're the only one in the world. It's said that in this state, even the strongest person will break down. Oh, looks like you haven't heard of it. It's okay. You're very lucky. I'll let you experience it. Crack, crack. His palm stroked gently, starting from Winston's left fingers and pinching upwards inch by inch. The crisp sound of bones shattering was like beans popping in a pot. It was fine and dense. Arms, shoulders, sternum, ribs. It spread, unhurriedly. At first, it was mixed with earth-shattering howls, but Tang seemed to be tired of hearing it. He simply dislocated Winston's chin, and it turned into a low whimper. It's very moving. It's really a beautiful melody. What do you think? Don't look at me like that. I'm afraid that I won't be able to help myself and cripple your pair of annoying balls. Don't worry, I'm just saying. This place is less than 1,000 miles away from the capital. With your current physical condition, you can only take a carriage. Well, it'll take about a week. Within a week. I want you to open your eyes wide and watch. You can only watch. You can't do anything else. You need someone to feed you when you eat. You need someone to help you wear clothes. If you need to pee, you can only watch yourself pee and pee on the bedsheets below you. Whoa. With a mournful cry, Winston looked at the sky with lifeless eyes. He was in complete despair. With his arrogant and condescending personality, compared to death, this kind of humiliation was undoubtedly even more unacceptable. This was destroying his martial arts state of mind. But unfortunately, the decision was not in his hands. Crack. He carefully crushed his collarbone. At this moment, from Winston's neck down, there was almost no complete bone. His entire body was lying in a strange and twisted position, like some kind of soft-bodied creature in the ocean. Clapping his hands and getting up, Tang looked at Winston's head regretfully and shook his head. If he wasn't worried that he would kill him immediately, he really wanted to continue crushing his skull and see if he could still live. Turning around, he swept his gaze over the group of cowering people. Finally, his gaze fixed on Annika, who was cowering behind Betsy like an ostrich. You just said, you know him? He pointed at Winston on the ground. It's a misunderstanding. We got the wrong person, We don't actually know her. Stunned, Betsy decisively shook her head and denied it. Although from the previous situation, this ruthless thug seemed to have some relationship with Annika. But the reality was that Annika didn't know him. In this way, it was better to avoid unnecessary trouble. Directly watching from the sidelines and staying out of this was undoubtedly the best way to deal with it. Tangen couldn't help but twitch when he heard this. He had been lying in ambush outside Alan's manor for a few days. How could he not know that Annika and Winston knew each other? The reason why he had asked in a doubtful tone was only to create the illusion that it was the first time he had met Annika. After all, although he was wearing a disguise item and she shouldn't be able to recognize him, he still had to prevent her from associating him with anything. But he didn't expect that the people around Annika were so vigilant, sizing up Betsy. Tang Un's expression suddenly froze. Then, he frowned slightly and looked at Betsy again with a doubtful expression. For some reason, he felt that this woman was somewhat familiar, as if he had seen her somewhere before. Tang Un's eyesight and memory were without a doubt. As long as he had seen her before, even if it was just a fleeting glance, it would still leave some impression. But now he was a bit uncertain. How could he have imagined that in just a few years, a noble young lady who seemed a bit brainless to him would suddenly become a capable and experienced businesswoman? A change in temperament was the most confusing. Of course, it was also because Tang In and Betsy had only known each other for a short period of time. If Josiah was here today, he would definitely be able to recognize his old friend from Lion City. After thinking for a while, Tang In couldn't find a match in his heart. So, he gave up and just treated it as if he had seen her somewhere before. He waved his hand and said, "Don't be nervous. I won't do anything to you. And, since you were able to call out Winston's name before, you should know him. How about this? Just treat it as doing a good deed. Take him away and get a doctor or something when you get back. Oh, don't worry. There won't be any trouble. He won't die so easily. Leave the rest to Alan. He knows what to do." After saying that, to prevent them from thinking too much, Tang In waved his hand and disappeared in an instant. Now that this matter was over, he obviously had to rush to take Sylvia and leave this place. After a while, Betsy and the others, who looked left and right but didn't see anyone, finally relaxed and let out a long sigh of relief. Phew, that scared me to death. Annika patted her rather large chest, looking as if she had yet to recover from the shock. Betsy was much more decisive. She knew that this wasn't a place to stay for long. She quickly waved her hand and said, "Let's go. Let's leave this place first." She paused and looked at Winston, whose status was unknown. She gritted her teeth and said, "Take him with us." Chapter 9:57. After a while, in a deserted tavern on a remote street in the Western District, the wooden door was pushed open with a creak. At the only table in the hall, two people sitting opposite each other and drinking turned to look at the door at the same time. Their expressions were joyful as they pushed their chairs and stood up. "Sir, haha, good people don't live long, but villains live for 1,000 years. I knew that when Sillin couldn't do anything to you." They hugged each other and hammered each other's backs. "Is that so? Why did I hear that someone is here to steal my girl and can't wait for me to die?" He was filled with righteous indignation. "Is that so? F***CK, I can't stand it. Which guy is so daring? Don't worry, you don't have to do anything this time. I'll immediately send someone to deal with him." How can I do that? Let me do it myself." Haha, you're so humorous." Needless to say, these two guys who had no bottom line were naturally Tang In and Philip. After greeting them in a shameless manner, Tang In turned to look at Alan, who couldn't hide his excitement, and nodded apologetically. "Sorry, I didn't think it through enough this time and drag you into this." Shaking his head, Alan solemnly and stubbornly replied, "No, Alan's achievements today are all because of Sir's support, so it's natural for me to work for Sir." Tangen couldn't help but pause when he heard this. He was moved and wanted to say something, but in the end, he didn't say anything. He just patted Alan's shoulder heavily. "Sit down first. After this, come back with me to the north." Sitting down, Alan hesitated for a moment before shaking his head. Sir, I'm engaged. After the engagement, it was naturally marriage. This was a matter that involved two families. Alan didn't care and could immediately go to the north with Tang in to ensure his safety. But Annika couldn't. Her family's roots were in the south, and there was also a rebellion involved. It was impossible for her to be in a hurry. Congratulations. I'll make up for it another day. Tang was stunned when he heard this, then nodded in understanding. He turned his head to look at Philip, who had sat down by himself, and said thoughtfully, "It seems that we need to have a good talk." Not many people knew that the Yadong business group was secretly working for the Gray Coat Army. Philip was also the leader, which could be seen from the fact that he was fully in charge of Alan's affairs. Therefore, as long as Philip chose to hide the truth, there would be room for negotiation with Alan. Alan had clearly considered this issue before. Without looking at Philip, he said softly, "It's all right, sir. You don't have to be troubled. I believe that after this incident, as long as nothing happens to you, they won't dare to do anything to me." Your mother." With a bitter laugh, Philip thought of a curse word. He then rubbed his forehead in pain and looked at Alan with dissatisfaction. "Aren't you putting me on a fire rack?" The only one who knew Alan's identity was Philip. Oh, and Winston. However, the latter could not even protect himself now, so naturally he was not included. In this way, if Alan's words were reversed, it meant that if something happened to Alan, the first person that Tang Yin would look for would definitely be Philip. "I'm sorry." Alan also knew that his words were somewhat inappropriate. After all, although Philip was nominally here to capture him, he had not made any moves these few days. It could be said that he had been extremely kind to him. Therefore, after hearing this, he stood up and bowed to express his apology. "All right, sit down and talk." He was faking it. There's no need to apologize to this fellow. Pulling Alan back to his seat, Tang In looked at Philip with a faint smile. "Say it, what are your conditions?" With the friendship between Tang In and Philip, there was indeed no need to be pretentious. It was enough for them to know each other's hearts. If Alan were to say it out loud, he would feel uncomfortable. Of course, this was not an excuse to take advantage of him. Friends, of course, would not make things difficult for each other. The atmosphere eased, and Philip shrugged indifferently. "You're overthinking it. With our relationship, there's no need for conditions." "Well, can you give me a chance to poach him?" "Don't be angry. It's a fair competition." Calm down. You're the one who told me to name my conditions." Let go, I can't breathe." "I'm joking, really just joking, cough, cough." With great difficulty, he pried Tang Un's hand off his collar. Philip's face was red as he took a few deep breaths and muttered in dissatisfaction, "Really? I came all the way here to provide you with help. Okay? Is this the attitude you should treat your benefactor?" Tang In calmly raised his wine glass. "If you don't name your conditions, I'll pretend that you never mentioned them." All right. No sense of humor at all. Adjusting his collar, Philip asked nervously, "By the way, how is Winston? You didn't kill him, right? Although he does deserve to die, it'll be very troublesome if he dies." He waved his hand casually. "Don't worry. He should be in Alan's manor now, enjoying the temptation of the white cloak angel's uniform. He's alive and well." "Well, very well." "What angel? Temptation?" Philip looked at Tang In suspiciously, but could not see anything from the latter's expression. He nodded. "Forget it. It's good that he's not dead. I really don't have any conditions. I'm just a messenger." "Well, my old man wants to see you." "No." Tang In shook his head and rejected without even thinking. What a joke. If he went to see the sword god Wu Ding at this time, wouldn't he be courting death? Of course, this did not mean that Wu Ding was definitely setting up a trap. It was just that both sides had different standpoints. Wu Ding was loyal to the brand. Even if he did not want to kill Tang Yin for the benefit of the Empire, if there was a chance, he would not let go of the chance to kill Tang Yin, who was vaguely becoming the Gray Coat Army's protective umbrella. Philip was not surprised and continued. "If you don't want to see him, it's best to restrict the activities of the Gray Coat Army. The bottom line is to not touch the official roads and military routes. Perhaps you haven't received the news yet, but the border has not been peaceful recently. The northern wilderness tribes are restless and seem to be about to start a war. Pause for a while. He spread his hands and said, "We're all Brand's people. We can solve our own conflicts and discuss things. But when facing external threats, even if we can't work together to resist, we should at least not drag each other down. This is my old man's opinion, and also the opinion of the court. I'm not Brand's people." Tang In pursed his lips and laughed. "Not drag each other down? Haha, it's not dragging Brand's people down. If I remember correctly, at this time last year, the Gray Coat Army worked together with Brand to resist the northern wilderness tribes. What happened in the end? Someone had stabbed him in the back. Haha, you're still doing this now. Do you think we're too stupid or that you're too naive?" Ahem. Philip coughed a few times and was obviously embarrassed. He said helplessly, "Even if you want to shoot, you should aim at the target. I didn't come up with this idea. You're not good people either," Tang In said disdainfully. "At that time, it was you, the new aristocrats, who facilitated the peace talks. In the end, before the Brand's army entered the City of Dawn, not only did you not help, you didn't even give a warning beforehand. Is this the attitude a collaborator should have? You don't understand. The situation was very complicated. F***CK. You're talking about me? You're innocent?" Philip seemed to be annoyed by the repeated face-slapping questions. He waved his hand and said loudly, "If you hadn't provoked the Temple of Light, would we have been so passive?" After that, the old aristocrats took the opportunity to make things difficult for us. We suffered heavy losses and haven't recovered yet. Nonsense. Tang In pursed his lips in disdain. Do you dare to say that without me, Brand wouldn't have attacked the Gray Coat Army? Anyway, you're not innocent. At least you were the fuse. Fuse my ass. Bang. He put down his wine glass heavily. He also slammed the table and stood up. He was flustered and exasperated. F***CK. Sir, both of you calm down. Let's drink first, drink." Alan saw that the situation was not good and quickly stood up to be the peacemaker. He stuffed wine glasses into the hands of both of them. In a moment of anger, he took the opportunity to scold them to his heart's content. Or rather, it could not even be considered anger. After all, the two of them were too insignificant in such a big matter. This was not something they could decide, so naturally, there was no need to talk about falling out over it. After sitting down, Philip tilted his head back and gulped down a mouthful of wine. He let out a long breath and leaned back in his chair. "Anyway, I've already informed them. You can decide what you want to do. Well, let me give you a friendly reminder. That old man of mine has protected the Empire for most of his life. He's very stubborn. It's not surprising that he would do anything for this reason, so you'd better seriously consider it." "Is this a threat?" F***CKU. Philip suddenly jumped up and roared. "This is concern. Do you understand that I'm concerned about you? Oomph. Forget it. You can think whatever you want. If it wasn't for the fact that it concerns Josiah's safety, I wouldn't bother to remind a wretched fellow like you. Hee, you can relax. I'm responsible for Josiah's safety. Who cares about you?" Tang In glanced at him and deliberately provoked him. Philip was beyond angry. "You're responsible? You're not responsible. If my old man insists on going north, can you protect him?" He suddenly paused, as if he had realized something. Philip quickly regained his composure and looked at Tang In suspiciously. "He really does have the intention of going north." Rubbing his chin, Tang In waved his hand. "Don't worry about me. Continue." "Well, why did your old man suddenly change his mind and not insist on going north? What the hell?" Philip knew that he had been tricked. He sat down unhappily and took a big gulp from the wine jar. This time, it was Tang In's turn to be shameless. "Hey, don't be like this. With our relationship, what's there that can't be said? Is it that a master from the northern wilderness has come, so he can't leave the city? Or is there a change in the palace, and he needs to be there? Oh, by the way, your old man isn't young anymore. Could it be that his body is unwell? Stop guessing. You know that I can't say anything about this." When it came to the patron saint of the brand, it was no small matter. Therefore, even Philip, who never cared about anything, smiled bitterly and waved his hand to interrupt him. He put on a determined expression with a helpless expression. However, he was secretly shocked. He knew his own situation. The god of swords Wu Ding's body was indeed getting worse by the day. Since Philip had said so, Tang naturally couldn't ask any more questions. He regretfully suppressed the doubts in his heart. Then, he reached into his bosom and took out a scroll and threw it to Philip. Haha, don't think that we can only passively take a beating. Bring this to your old man and let him think carefully about whether it's worth going north. A slightly gloomy young man was guarding the wooden ladder. When he saw Tang approaching, he stepped forward and handed over the package in his hand. Boss, this is what you want. In addition, the wooden bucket and hot water have been sent to the room upstairs. Well, where's Michaud? The captain is arranging the residence of the leader's family members. Well, inform Michaud, don't neglect him. Send them out of the city as soon as possible and then send them to the northern station by water. Yes, sir. After a short conversation, the gloomy young man quietly left. Tang took the package and walked to the second floor of the attic. He did not book the entire hotel. Although it was safe enough, it would be too conspicuous. However, the business of the hotel was really bad. There was almost no one on the second floor. Tang didn't stop until he reached the door on the left at the end of the corridor. He raised his hand and knocked on the wooden door. The door is not locked. A slightly tired voice came from the door. When he opened the wooden door, the curtains in the room were not open, and it was a little dark. But after all, it was daytime, so he could still see the figure sitting on the chair facing the wooden door. A mottled gray, or rather a mottled gray, covered the original color of the clothes. If he got closer, he could even smell a faint odor. Of course, this was not the main point. The main point was that the style of the clothes was serious prison clothes. If there were people who participated in the trial in the square here, they would be able to recognize the figure in the prison clothes at a glance. It was the flower of the nights, Sylvia, who seemed to have been buried in the sea of fire not long ago. You should rest. Tang closed the wooden door and walked to the window to open the curtain. Outside the window, the sky was still gloomy and it was drizzling. However, compared to the dark room, the light that came in was still bright. It illuminated the slightly old furnishings in the room and also illuminated Sylvia's dim and tired look. I can't sleep. Depressed, Sylvia's words became extremely concise. Oh, it's my fault. You should wash up first and then rest. As if he didn't see Sylvia's gloomy mood, Tang raised the package in his hand. Clean clothes, wash up and change into them. According to the saying in my hometown, this is called getting rid of bad luck. If necessary, you have to cross a brazier or something. After a pause, he added with a sigh, don't think too much. After turning over this page, there will be a new beginning. I don't think too much, at least not now. Sylvia calmly raised her head and moved her fingers. She wanted to point to the tall wooden basin, but she didn't succeed. I just can't move. I'm thinking about how to wash it. Touching his nose, Tang just remembered that Sylvia's body was still like a mountain. He awkwardly spread out his hands. Sorry, it's my negligence. Wait a minute. I'll go outside and find a waitress to help you wash it. She walked to the door. No need. What? Tang turned his head in surprise. Sylvia pursed her lips and unconsciously lowered her head to avoid Tang's gaze. The room fell into silence. The sound of raindrops outside the window gradually became clear. The raindrops hit the eaves, fell into the puddles, and rushed to the flowers and leaves. The subtle sounds, which were simple, ethereal, or slightly dull, intertwined together like a symphony of nature. It wasn't very pleasant, but it was simple and natural. Scratching his head, Tang somewhat inexplicably broke the silence. If there's nothing else, I'll go out and help you call. No need. She interrupted and repeated again. Sylvia raised her head. Her eyes were in a trance, but her expression was calm and casual. Help me wash it. Okay, I didn't ask. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.